stabbed another beast in the side. Every time that he had wanted to deal the killing blow, another enemy was upon him, stopping him from doing so. Yet, he fought on. Still, more enemies kept coming as chaos erupted all around them. No clear lines could be seen anymore. All that was visible were the new enemies in front of you at every turn. For him, time seemed to slow. He enjoyed this. He was born for this. His brother was always born to rule, but he was born to fight and fuck. That is what he always excelled at. His spear flashed towards his enemies' legs, arms and torsos. He broke noses with his shield, before trying to slice their necks with his spear. He had never felt more alive than he did now. Even when he was cut on his shoulder by a northern axe, he simply ignored the pain to repay his opponent in a lethal manner. He turned around, bashed his shield against him to create space, and then swirled his spear towards every opening in the man's armor. The warrior managed to block most of them and his armor the rest, but after a while he found his opening. He swung the axe away with his shield and changed his grip on his spear, as he stepped inside the man's guard. He held his spear more like a long dagger now than anything else and stabbed the man in the neck with deadly precision. It was a trick he had once learned from an SOZ pit fighter. He had used it more than once since. It was really heavy to hold your spear like that, but if you mastered the technique it was worth the struggle. That all changed when a group of riders wearing the tabards of Houses Bolton, Dustin and Riswell arrived. They encircled him, quickly dealing with his remaining guards. Obara stabbed one's horse down, while he slashed one's femoral artery open with his spear when he passed by. Still, they kept coming. He and Obara fought back to back, as he saw how some his men were trying to reach him in the chaos of the battle. They stabbed and pivoted in all directions, managing to keep the enemies at bay. Suddenly, a rider wearing the brown Riswell horse on his shield charged forward. He shot his spear towards the man, but the Norman deflected it with his shield. He barely had time to jump aside, almost being trampled by the charge. When he turned around, he could see how his daughter hadn't been that quick. Obara fell to the ground, just as he turned. Her neck cut clean open from the side by the rider's sword. He saw the life leave his daughter's eyes quickly, as she looked up at him for help before dropping to the ground. Primal rage took over and he threw all caution to the wind. Before he even realized it, he was sprinting towards the Riswell rider. A man in the yellow of House Dustin tried to block him, but he dodged the man's horse just in time. He ran by, as the man's swing missed him completely. The riders, surprised at his mad charge, turned to meet him, but they were too late. The Riswell rider was turning, not realizing the mortal danger coming for him. Just as the man turned his horse around, he started his jump. The man's blue eyes looked up in shock and terror as he tackled him to the ground. Not caring that he lost his shield and spear in the act, he drew one of the poisoned daggers from his belt. He stabbed the man repeatedly in the neck. Not caring about anything except for the satisfying feeling of the warm blood of his daughter's killer splashing up in his face. When he finally turned around, he saw he was surrounded by enemy horsemen. He picked the sword up from the horseman he had killed and waved it in the air around him, daring any of them to come forward. The first who did so was another Riswell. Another noble, if his armor had something to say for it. "You killed my cousin!" The man screamed in rage, as he charged him. He waited until the right time, until the man was just close enough. He slashed at the horse's neck, as he ducked under the rider's swing. The horse's squeal was something that could haunt your dreams for days. The rider was thrown off, as its cries were soon replaced with the sound of the horse choking on its own blood. He ran towards the fallen rider, intending to kill another kinsman of his daughter's killer. Yet, just as he got there, he heard another horse neighing behind him. He quickly turned around but was hit by something hard in the head. He fell hard to the ground. As he lay there, he realized his head was getting wet. He looked up, as his opponent jumped from his horse. Looking up was difficult, he realized. The man who had hit him was dressed in grey northern armor, with a pink tabard and cloak. On his tabard was displayed the flayed man of House Bolton. "Sorry, I couldn't allow you to kill my uncle, Prince Oberyn. I promise to deliver your bones and that of your daughter back to Dawn to your brother," the young Bolton said, as he crouched over him. Next, he felt a small sharp pain under his arm in the hole in his armor. His breath stopped, as his eyesight darkened. The faces of his brother, sister and daughters passed in his mind in quick succession until they settled on Elaria, the love of his life. He saw her black hair and smelled its smell in his nose. Elaria, I have failed you. Take care of my daughters, I will wait for you on the other side. John. His charge had worked wonders, just as Rob had predicted. After the flight of the enemy left flank cavalry, he had charged in the hole there. He had expected to face the enemy reserve cavalry, while the Vale horse kept the enemy right busy, but they seemed to have ridden too far off chasing those who had fled. He had simply charged on and divided his forces in two, striking both the enemy left and center in the flank and rear. It was a bloodbath. The enemy left had disintegrated. It had partly consisted of Levi from the Stormlands and Reach that had been forced into the line. These had all gone running to the hills when the charges connected. Some of the Golden Company had also fled, although most had formed a circle to and fought off everyone on every side. It would only be a matter of time before they were brought down. The Dornish center had reacted differently. Prince Oberyn and some of his lords had managed to construct another spear wall to meet his charge, yet on impact it had still shattered. The backlines were in complete chaos as Northmen and Dornishmen were locked sometimes in hand-to-hand combat. He had just finished off an enemy from House Faith, when suddenly cries came that the Red Viper was dead. This, in combination with the encirclement, seemed to break the spirit of the Dornish and soon many of them started surrendering. The nail in the coffin was the sight of the Vale cavalry victorious on the other side and preparing to charge the right of their army. He quickly reorganized parts of his squadron, finding Dom and Roose Riswell and their retinues in the process. The latter had a big bruise on the right side of his head but seemed unharmed otherwise. He also seemed to have changed horses, although that wasn't really surprising in a battle like this. Having gathered a few hundred horsemen, he rallied them towards the enemy archer line. However, before his charge could connect, they were finally met by the enemy reserve. He saw the banners of House Connington and Targaryen fly in the air towards them. The figure of Aegon could clearly be seen in his black Targaryen armor. It was made even more obvious by the two figures in white riding next to him. He had no more time to think about it, as soon the sights clashed. He deflected a swing from an axe on his shield and parried a sword with his own as he rode through the enemy's ranks. He purposely didn't ride towards Aegon and his banner. Robb had no use for him death after he recklessly faced the opposing Kingsguard. He slashed, hacked and rode his way through the enemy side. His trusted direwolf, Winterfell guards and friends were all at his sides. Robb had entrusted him with a very strong retinue, knowing that he would be a target in this battle. Among them were some of his honor guard, their mutual friends. Most notably Sir Lucas Blackwood and Robin Flint, whom had fought with him during his campaign in the Westerlands. He fought his way through the fighting in a haze, not thinking about anything except the next weapon coming his way. None of his enemies seemed familiar, as he didn't care for any of the Golden Company men and none of the West AOC seemed important enough for him to care. That all changed when he suddenly came eye to eye with one of the White Cloaks. He glanced around him, but Aegon couldn't be seen anywhere. The man in front of him saw him look and grinned. "His Grace is not here, he sent me to finish you off while he wins the battle." He looked the man over in confusion. He had sky-blue eyes and a strong jaw. A close-cropped beard showed under his half-helm and a cocky grin decorated his mouth. However, those eyes showed a fiery determination to his objective. Win the battle. How would he do that? Half his army has already surrendered. The Reachmen and Stormlanders are gone and the Dornish are throwing down their weapons in droves. The only ones that remain are his sellswords, but they are surrounded and heavily outnumbered. Give up now and my brother will let you live. He responded. This seemed to both shock and enrage his opponent. My countrymen would never surrender. Prince Oberyn would rather die than surrender our cause. He screamed, as he rode towards him. He quickly deflected the angry swing with his shield, before replying. That's why they are only surrendering after he was killed. Your Martell Prince is dead, and so will you be if you continue this folly. This seemed to throw the man off and he used it to lift his leg, making him lose balance. The White Knight fell from his horse in the mud but got up quickly. Lies. Prince Oberyn would never lose to someone like you. He kept denying his words, as he attacked him again. He turned his horse to meet the charge with his shield, deflected the enemy's attacks. "I didn't kill him, some of my countrymen did. Who is he to you anyway?" He figured the man was Dornish, but he didn't have enough knowledge about Dornish swordsmen to know any that could be considered for a white cloak. "My name is Sir Demon Sand, son to Sir Ian Illyrian, the heir to God's grace. Former squire to Prince Oberyn Martell and knighted by him. Knight of the King's Guard of His Grace Aegon Targaryen and personal shield to his future wife, Princess Arianne Martell," the man proudly proclaimed, as he regained his composure for another set of attacks. Well, that explained it. The man was personally tied to Prince Oberyn and House Martell. That meant this could get ugly. Just as he tensed his muscles for the upcoming charge, he saw a flash come up from his right. He quickly turned and brought his sword up in reflex. Steel clashed on steel, and although he was able to stop the blow from splitting him in two, he still lost his footing and barreled over the side of his horse towards the ground. He jumped back to his feet and discarded his shield, as the rider approached him. He never made it though, as Sir Lucas Blackwood rode behind him and hit him on the back of the head with his morning star. The enemy knight was dead before he hit the ground. Another lancer tried to do the same but was soon taken down by Ghost, who was now in the process of tearing the man's throat out. He quickly turned back to Sir Demon, who had already run at him. He parried his first, second and third blows. He sidestepped, dodged and blocked swing after swing. The knight was indeed good, as he could get no real counter-attacks in. However, the man was also fighting with rage. An old lesson from Sir Roderick ran on repeat in his head. You fight with your head, not your emotions. They will get you killed on the battlefield. He hoped that his old master-at-arms was right. He dodged another swing to his right, blocking the follow-up underhand swing. He managed to lock swords together with the Dornish knight, both cross-guards pushing against each other. Now it was time for him to strike back. He punched the man square in the face with his mailed fist and stepped back, allowing his sword to go free. Immediately, he followed this up with an underhand swing aimed at the man's side. The knight managed to block it with his shield, but the momentum was his now. He pushed forward, bashing his shoulder against the shield and twisting aside, aiming a swing at his head. The swing was blocked and pushed back, but he wouldn't back down now. He attacked the man relentlessly. Swings and cuts from all directions flew toward him. The white cloak managed to block most, but he managed to nick his upper thigh with one of his attacks. Still, the Dornish knight fought on. "Surrender. You have lost this battle already, you don't have to lose your life as well," he screamed, as he aimed an overhead slash at the knight's head. "Never." The man grunted. "I will avenge the prince and bath in your blood tonight," he responded, as the blow was blocked. They went back and forth once more, until he finally saw his opportunity. He feinted to the right and then ducked immediately. At the same time, he swirled his sword under the shield that came up to block his feint. He added his left hand to the pommel of the sword and stabbed forward as hard as he could. The sword punched hard against the man's plate armor. Not hard enough to pierce through it, as it was made from excellent steel, but more than enough to obviously hurt the knight. He ignored the sharp pain in his arms from the thrust and brought his sword up, battering the man's shield until he let his guard down from the pain. Then he went for it. He knocked his sword out of the way in a sideways swing and aimed a backhanded swing for the knight's throat. The blow connected, ripping through muscle and flesh like it was nothing. The knight immediately fell down as blood spurted out of his neck. He dropped his sword and tried to stop the wound from bleeding with his hands, but it was too late. He had cut the major artery. He looked on the dying knight with pity and sadness. "Such a useless death. I will make sure that your bones are brought to your father's home in Dorne," he told the man, who looked up at his words. The Dornishman nodded, something coming close to thankfulness in his eyes. Then the man's hands gave out and he died within moments. He took a moment to recover his breath, as he leaned on his sword and looked around. He saw that his friends and guards had managed to keep most of the enemies away from him. The fighting was hard, but it was obvious reinforcements had arrived when he had been locked in his duel. He saw Vale and Riverlander knights in the distance on both sides and knew the fight would be over soon. He looked around and saw the Targaryen banner not far from him. He walked over towards it, only having to hamstring a single Martell man-at-arms on his way there to reach it safely. There he saw how Lord Flint and his two sons, together with Sir Donal Locke and Robin Flint, were fighting the Pretender and his remaining Kingsguard knight. He could see how the knight wounded one of the Flints, before being pressed hard by Robin and Sir Donal. Lord Flint and the other son quickly attacked Egon together. Despite black fear, the young man was doomed. After cutting Lord Flint with it, the sword was knocked out of his hand by the son. After the fact, he was brutally kicked into the mud. A similar thing happened with his protector. He went for a vicious attack on Robin, who barely managed to block the blow. However, the opening he left in his defense was enough for the heir to house Locke. He stabbed the man right under his armpit, in the weakness of his armor. By the time that he pulled the sword out, the White Knight was already dead. Lord Flint ignored his wound and picked up Black Fear. "Our king will love this gift." He spat at the Pretender as he lay in the mud. He looked around and screamed, as he thrust Black Fear into the air. "Your precious king is captured and his Kingsguard is dead. Surrender now or join them with your guts spilling in the mud." The experienced lord shouted. Soon the cry was taken up by dozens of men all over the battle. Not much later, the sounds of metal fallen on metal could be heard as the enemy surrendered in mass. Still he could hear fighting, nearing them as he walked up to Lord Flint greeting him with a nod. There he saw John Connington hacking and slashing his way towards Egon. "Surrender!" his men shouted. "Never, I will never surrender to scum like you." The Stormlander shouted aggressively, as he swung his sword in all directions. He ran forward towards it and caught one of his reckless swings on his sword. "And will you surrender to me?" he simply asked, as he pulled his helmet off. At the sight of him, the knight stepped back in shock, his sword clattering to the ground. Men moved in to detain him, but he stopped them with a hand gesture. After a few moments, Connington looked back and forth between him and the Pretender in the mud until he finally relented. "Yes, I will surrender to you." Egon's Hand of the King responded in a defeated tone as he went to his knees. "Forgive me, Jaehaerys. Please Rhaegar, forgive me for fighting against your son." He said nothing in response, but still took pity on the knight. He had lived for a decade in the lie that he had been helping Rhaegar's son take back his birthright. His mission had eventually driven him to clash swords with Rhaegar's actual son, and it seemed to have broken him. The veteran Stormlander refused to look up from the dirt, as he kept asking for forgiveness from his long-deaf prince and friend. He walked away, greeting the nearby nobles and taking control of the situation in the aftermath of the bloody battle. It seemed a few hundred Golden Company men were still resisting, but Robb was dealing with them by making his archers focus fire in their ranks. As he checked on his guard and tried to organize the wounded on this part of the field, the battle ended. He soon met Robb, as they raided the enemy camp. Robb had been so smart as to send Harmond Umber to take control of it. This had resulted in the capture of Varys. The spider was safely locked away for now, awaiting Robb's judgment like the rest of them. Many captives were made, hailing from almost all Dornish houses. Most notably were Lords Euronwood, Fowler, Gargallan and Manwadi. Many Dornish nobles had also fallen in the battle. A list of them would soon be drawn up. Hundreds of Golden Company men had also thrown down their weapons. Heated debate was to come on what they would have to do to them. Still, the great victory had come at a cost. Another important Riverlander noble had died in Lord Diari, who left but a single son and heir in Riverrun. His family nearing extinction. Blackwood and Piper cousins had also been slain, together with the heirs to houses Terrick and Roger. From the Vale, Lords Donijah and Tolit were the most notable losses, among many lower-ranked knights. The North hadn't been spared either. Sir Helman Tallheart had died, already sparking a succession discussion by neighbouring houses like Glover and Ryswell on whether his brother or daughter should succeed him. Another Ryswell cousin had also died, together with members from lesser branches of houses Slate, Woolfield, Ironsmith and Lake. Luckily none of their friends had been lost, although some had been wounded during the fighting. As he strolled back into their camp, most men still looked weirdly at him due to his armor and revealed ancestry. Yet, something had changed from the night before. Next to weariness, he could see respect and something else. When he said as much to the Karstark brothers, they simply laughed at him. What had you expected, John? One night it is revealed to the whole army that you are the son and possible heir to our sworn enemy from the last 2 generations. The next day it is your charge that breaks the enemy's flank and forces the Dornish to their knees. On top of that you regroup parts of your men and annihilate their reserves, single-handedly killing one of the enemy's Kingsguard in the process and managing to get Connington to surrender like a crying 7-year-old girl, while your men capture your supposed half-brother. Half these men are scared to death of you, either of your family tree or your achievements. And don't forget your little stunt before the battle that got their whole cavalry flank to flee. That act won us the battle before it even started. Harry added. He had simply stared at his friends at that response. Scared of me? He had brought out confused. At this, Tor had rolled his eyes in annoyance. Seriously, Snow? You have been walking around with an overgrown wolf the size of a pony for the last 2 years. A snow-white beast with blood-red eyes that never ever makes a bloody sound. People have been scared of you from long before the army even reached the Riverlands. What's your big surprise now? He looked over to Ghost at that. His companion seemed to agree with Tor, proudly walking beside him at the idea of scaring all the two-leggers. Although he couldn't shake the feeling that Ghost hadn't appreciated being called a beast. The Karstark brothers looked weirdly at the silent interaction between him and Ghost but said nothing. Still, it seemed like they were picking up on his link with the direwolf and not for the first time. He would have to talk with Robb about it, they were his brothers-in-law after all. Now he would just go to sleep. He was exhausted. Chapter 56, The Storm Queen Rises. 300 AC. Robb. It had been 10 days since the battle. The men were calling it the Field of Gold, as a nod to the infamous Field of Fire. The field had been littered with bodies in golden armor, as the Golden Company had taken the brunt of the enemy casualties. At the start of the battle, they had had close to 8,000 men. Now, just 1,500 remained in their custody. A few hundred had escaped, although some had already been hunted down and the others would quickly follow suit. On top of that, they also had around 8,000 Dornish captives. 2,000 to 3,000 had escaped to all corners of the Stormlands as well. 2 days ago, a hunting party led by Roose Ryswell had come across a band of 150 or so of them to their west. The youngest son of Lord Ryswell hadn't left any of them alive. Although cruel, it was also practical. They had way too many captives already. Heavy discussion had ensued on what to do with them for days. Yesterday, an agreement had finally been reached between Lord Harold, Lord Davos and him with the backing of their most important lords. All West AOC members of the Golden Company, or those of significant West AOC heritage, would be given the chance to take the Black. If they refused, they would be executed. All SOZ members would be put to the sword directly. They could not be relied upon to serve at the wall, they would neither see purpose in defending the kingdoms nor would they integrate well into the force. It would also serve as a message to SOs to stay out of West AOC affairs. Pentos had been heavily involved in the Pretender's bid for the Iron Throne and Daenerys was rumored to be supported by thousands of escaped slaves from all over the continent. It was time they learned what awaited them across the narrow sea. It was his goal to disband the Golden Company. The company had proven itself a thorn into the side of Westeros for over a century, he would not allow them to come back and haunt his descendants. They had killed or captured its Captain General, Paymaster, Spymaster and the majority of its sergeants. Blackfyr had been recovered, as well as the heads of the former Captain Generals of the Mercenary Company along with all other relics. Yet, their destruction was not yet guaranteed. Around 1,000 or so still roamed the Stormlands, either in small bands fleeing from the field of battle or in garrisons spread around the castles of the kingdom. Another 1,000 resided on parts of the Stepstones, they had been stranded there since a storm had blown them off course. Among them were their infamous battle elephants. He would have to deal with both groups decisively if he wanted to wipe the company from existence. They had agreed to keep as much of the Dornish troops alive, as it gave them a great negotiation position with Doran Martell. If they were to execute all of them, it would strip Dorne from the vast majority of their army needed to protect them from incursions from the Reach, Essos or even them through the Stormlands. They had also captured many nobles. Lords Euronwood, Fowler, Gargallan, Corgyle and Manwadi had been captured, but also Sir Ian Illyrian the heir to God's Grace, Sir Ulwick Euler and one of the Dalt brothers. Together with them some 200 lower nobles or members of side branches of the bigger families had been captured as well. The latter were already sent to different castles across the former Stormlands, while the main nobles had accompanied them to Storm's End. Many Dornish nobles had also died. The second Dalt brother, Lords Jourdain and Vaith, as well as Sir Simon Santager and Sir Aaron Corgyle. Half of those had been on the front line when Jon charged them. They had been trampled or slain by his horsemen in the chaos. Of course, what really shook the Dornish was the death of their prince and his first daughter. He would make a show of strength by showing they had captured the majority of the Dornish nobility and killed the rest. In the center of that strategy would be Nymeria Sand, Prince Oberyn's surviving daughter and an illegitimate member of House Martell. Hopefully her presence would convince her sister and cousin Arianne to surrender the old Baratheon fortress. The remaining captives, a few hundred or so, were Reachmen and Stormlanders. The latter were given to the Stormlords to be judged amongst their own, whilst the former would be released on the condition to never set foot outside the Reach again. Of course, the few nobles from the Reach would be kept in captivity to put extra pressure on House Tyrell in future negotiations. They could serve as either claimants to forfeited keeps or nobles whose absence would throw certain border regions into chaos. Most Reach and Stormlands nobles had successfully managed to flee with the cavalry, so he doubted their capture would have that big of an influence, but every little helped. Now he would have to oversee the executions. It fell on him to execute the company leaders himself, as the person who passes the sentence should swing the sword. As such, he would take the heads of Gorys and Dorian, the company paymaster, as well as that of Lysan Omar, the company spymaster. They were its highest-ranking surviving foreign members. In the end, he also took the heads of some of the remaining sergeants. In total, around 700 men were executed, with many refusing to freeze their balls at the wall for the rest of their lives. Still, 736 agreed to join the Night's Watch. A lot of them were men of great experience in running a military organization. They would be a great boon for the Order. Amongst those joining were Harry Strickland and Jon Connington. The latter was only given the choice out of a gesture for Jon. Aegon's other advisors, such as Varys, would be put to the sword. Most, including his Kingsguard, had already died anyway. Still, Jon had pleaded for Connington to be allowed to take the black. The two had spent a lot of time together and he had granted his brother his request. None of his northern lords had complained, as they knew the Night's Watch served for life. Some Valymen had grumbled, but he had been able to overrule them. This would allow Jon to keep in contact with the former Lord of Griffin's Roost and learn more about his father, a thing he had always wanted. It would also sufficiently neutralize the threat the man posed. The executions of Varys and the Pretender would have to wait. Varys would be tortured to tell the truth about the Pretender and spill his remaining plots active in the world. Harry Strickland would be questioned in detail as well, before being allowed to sail north. He walked restlessly around the camp as he looked upon the drum tower of the ancient keep that had once belonged to the Durrandons. No Godswood was in sight to calm him after taking so many lives. For millennia, one had lain behind those high curtain walls. Yet, it had all been destroyed by Stannis' evil witch, Lord Davos had told him. It was an unspeakable loss for all Old Gods believers, as the keep had been said to have been constructed by Brandon the Builder in the time of heroes. Its Godswood had probably been even older. Lord Davos had already promised to regrow it, as a gesture of goodwill. Yet, no weirwood would serve at its heart. He had asked his lords for a possibility to take seeds from the north and replant them here, but no clear answers had been given. He was determined to look in Winterfell's ancient library to try and find something about it. If he wanted the old gods to be respected in the southern kingdoms, he would have to restore these old places of worship to teach the Southrons they weren't threatening to them. He went to sleep thinking of his plans to rebuild the Riverlands and a possible way to stop religious rifts from forming there. The last thing he wanted for his sons and grandsons to have to deal with was a rebellious half of the kingdom on religious reasons. 2 weeks later, he stood in the throne room of Storm's End, his lords and vassals behind him on the side. The Valyman under Lord Harold in front of him. Taking her place on the throne for the first time was Queen Shireen Baratheon. In the center were the lords of her kingdom, as they renewed their oaths to her one by one. Yet, not only the ones who had long been loyal to her had showed up. Many of those who had kept neutral or had been hindered by the Golden Company had ridden hard and fast to join their queen. Lord Swan and Caffin chiefly amongst them, but many smaller houses also joining in. A very unexpected arrival had only come this morning. Lord Fell had come with a small retinue and both his young sons to ask for the forgiveness of the Queen and pay her homage. Many had been enraged, whilst others had been rejoiced at the idea of mending the rifts these wars had caused. In the end, it had been agreed that his heir would serve as a ward in Storm's End until his majority, whilst he had also given up around 15% of his lands to his more loyal neighbours. Now the Lord was on his knees before the throne just as the others were, accepted back into the fold. Next to the Queen stood her two cousins. Her betrothed Edric Storm sat on a smaller chair in front of her on the right, whilst Lord Davos stood loyally behind the chair besides his queen. On the other side stood Sir Gendry, her other cousin and protector. The boy had been knighted for saving Lord Morrigan's life during the battle. Rumour had it that he had bested 17 enemies with his massive warhammer and people were already calling him the embodiment of his father's martial prowess. After all the nobles, big and small, had pledged themselves to her, Shireen started rewarding her loyal followers. She had started by promising Lord Davos and his family lands from the treacherous House Whitehead and smaller knightly ones once they had been recaptured. Through this and other honours she made him and House Seaworth full-fledged lords in the peerage of her kingdom. Afterwards many nobles passed the review. Notably, Sir Andrew Estermont received the forfeited lands of House Sunglass, after its new lord had gone to Volantis to align himself with Daenerys Targaryen, as well as the lands of its vassal, the now extinct House Rampton. Lord Morrigan received additional lands, as well as the guardianship over young Raymond Connington, the new ruler of Griffin's Roost. Raymond's sister Alyn was betrothed to Lord Davos' 9-year-old heir Stannis to keep them in line in the future and have House Seaworth mingle with the old nobility of the country. In the meantime, Griffin's Roost would be controlled by a Castellan appointed by the Queen and her council. The keep had already fallen to a force of Stormlands with the help of John Connington, who had been persuaded by his brother to do so. It had been the first of many that would be reconquered in the following weeks. A joint letter had been sent by him, the Baratheons and Lord Euronwood to all the enemy garrisons in the kingdom. The now highest-ranking Dornish lord had been convinced that further resistance and bloodshed was futile. He had agreed to sign the letters on the condition that all men in the garrisons, highborn or lowborn, would be allowed to freely march back to Dorne. They had agreed and already responses were coming in that Night Song, Poddingfield, Blackhaven, Harvest Hall and all smaller keeps in that region would be evacuated in the following week. This was a huge victory for Queen Shireen and Lord Davos, as the families living there were now in their debt whilst they also showed their decisive action in retaking the country. The fact they managed to do so with no bloodshed served their cause even more. All in all, it seemed like the Queen had a real shot at reuniting the Stormlands. A thing he was most pleased about. Still, a lot of work would have to be done by her council. The Caron inheritance, capture of roaming warbands, punishment of traitors, dealing with the defiant Arholla followers, ruling with large parts of its ruling class dead, integration of the former Crown land territories, recapturing the remaining keeps. They had a lot of work to do. At least he could help with the warbands and the Golden Company. In front of him, the name of Sir Gendry Waters was suddenly called. He looked up, curious to see what would happen with King Robert's eldest bastard. He stepped down from the lowest steps and knelt before the throne of his cousin. It was no secret they were very close to each other, their behavior more resembling a relationship of a protective older brother with his little sister than that of cousins or a monarch and her subordinate. Sir Gendry, for your valiant and loyal deeds in the battle and your continued and loyal support of my reign, you will be rewarded. You will be raised to the rank of nobility and receive lands for your loyal service. Have you chosen a name for your future house? The young queen asked the raven-haired young man. I have, your grace. House Hammersmith, so my descendants never forget where we came from. The young warrior smiled. Lord Davos smiled as well, but some of the prouder nobles only scowled at the interaction. The confidence and quickness of the answer also showed that the boy had probably known about all of this beforehand without it getting out. A smart move on the part of the young queen, if you asked him. Queen Shireen Baratheon nodded and took the ceremonial sword Edric Storm handed her, as she walked down. Gendry Hammersmith, do you swear loyalty to me and my descendants until the end of days? I do. Young Gendry responded with a gravitas he hadn't seen from him before. I in return promise you and yours shall always have a place at my hearth. I shall treat you fairly and justly and ask nothing of you that would encroach on your honor. I now anoint you Lord Gendry Hammersmith, Lord of Dragonstone and Blackwater Bay. A collective gasp was heard from all around the throne room, as the young bastard had just been raised to one of the most important lords of her realm. Of course, the islands would partly lose in economic significance with the vast reduction of trade going towards King's Landing. Yet, the factor port would still remain at the mouth of Blackwater, combined with the growing importance of Duskendale and the continued existence of Sweetport Sound, Rook's Rest and Sharp Point would still give it more than enough economic importance to continue trade. In addition, its strategic importance was vital to the kingdom's defense. It seemed the young lord would be his kingdom's main neighbor and someone to watch. Maybe a marriage between him and one of his vassals could be achieved to tie the kingdoms closer together. Lords Valerian and Celtigar will serve under the new Lord of Dragonstone, the young queen said, as she looked up. Only those, she added, which led to even more murmurs in the crowd. She effectively stripped Houses Barrowman and the new lordship of Andrew Estermont from his rule. The other houses historically sworn to Dragonstone will from now on be directly sworn to the crown. A thing both Sir Andrew and Lord Dermon Barrowman looked pleased with. I want to remind everyone that my cousin has a weak dynastic claim to Dragonstone. Our shared great-grandmother Old Targaryen will give him the legitimacy that is needed to rule over those isles like before the conquest. Just like before the conquest, it will only concern the 3 isles of Dragonstone, Driftmark and Claw Isle. To ensure stability in the area, Lord Hammersmith and Lord Celtigar have agreed to the betrothal of Lord Gendry with Lord Celtigar's granddaughter Lady Prunella. She finished. Well, so much for that plan, he thought, as he looked upon the smug smile of old Lord Adrian Celtigar. It was the first time he had seen the man with anything other than a scowl on his face. It was also smart from the Baratheons. They tied the Valyrians to themselves in the aftermath of the Pretenders' invasion and before the arrival of Daenerys, who was born on Dragonstone. After the ceremony was done, he walked over to the new Lord Hammersmith and congratulated him. He kept a close eye on who was supporting the new lord and who wasn't. This was going to be his kingdom's neighbor, and so this intel could be important in the future. Afterwards, he and Lord Davos walked outside of a small room behind the throne. This led them to a stairway which brought them directly to the solar of the Lord of Storm's End. As the two of them waited on Lord Harold, he thought back on how luck had finally been on their side in this conflict. After the desertion of Aegon's allies and the decisive victory in the battle, they had marched towards Storm's End. There, they had realized Arianne Martell and her cousins and most Dornish nobles had fled. She had left a big enough garrison to hold the castle, yet its morale was understandably low. Then luck had once again smiled upon them. Whilst crossing the Stormlands, the Dornish contingent had stumbled upon Lord Swan and his forces on their way to join them in Storm's End after the news of the battle had reached them. Lord Swan had long prepared his forces and, wanting to make a good showing, had planned to reinforce them with around 300 riders. As such, the Dornish had been heavily outnumbered and had been quickly put down. The result was that Lord Swan had arrived before the walls with both Arianne Martell and Tyenn Sand in his custody. He had been hailed as a hero, and the choices and fate of his younger son Balon had long been forgotten. It had also strengthened his resolve in the alliance he had made with the Baratheons and the Stormlands. It had been the right decision, and many others had told him as much since. Now they not only had 2 of the Sand Snakes and a vast contingent of the Lords or Heirs of Dawn in their hands, they also had Doran's heir. When the garrison of Storm's End had seen how they had captured her, their morale had plummeted further. It had also emboldened the servants inside the keep. Last night, a few of them had opened a side door of the castle. One of his alert guards had spotted it, and they had immediately sent troops towards it. Once inside the castle, most of the garrison had quickly surrendered. All knew it was futile to resist once they got inside, but their illusion in winning this war had also been shattered by the past battle and the capture of the bulk of the Dornish nobility. Arianne was a pleasant, intelligent and beautiful woman, albeit as promiscuous as the rumors told you about Dorne. She had tried to seduce him the first time they had met. He had almost been tempted to play along, as it had been 2 years since he had held Aelys in his arms now. However, just like with all camp followers and other ladies who had tried, he had excused himself and relieved himself in the loneliness of his chambers. Alice had had a drawing made months ago which she had had him delivered by Raven. He had been afraid he would forget what her face looked like, now he had something to look at when he felt alone. With the capture of his heir and the evacuation of the Dornish troops outside the Stormlands, it was time to push their momentum and force Doran Martell into a peace treaty. Invading Dorne was off the table and both parties knew it. It meant they wouldn't be able to push as hard in the negotiations as they might have liked, but peace and stability before Daenerys arrived would be worth it. Lord Harold finally joined them, after which they had all poured themselves a glass of wine. He gave both of them the letter he had written last night to look over. It was his proposal for a peace treaty to Doran Martell. If his allies agreed, they could co-sign it and commence negotiations. His proposal consisted of a few clauses. First, the Martells and Dorne will recognize the irreversible dissolvement of the Iron Throne and the Seven Kingdoms. Second, they will recognize the independence of the kingdoms of the North and the Riverlands, the Stormlands and the possible formation of the Kingdom of the Vale. In turn, Dorne will be recognized as independent as well, with House Martell as its monarchs. Third, small borderlands will need to be given over to the Stormlands as payment for the war. Fourth, high ransoms were asked for all their captives. A list was included with all captives taken, with a great emphasis put on Arianne Martell, the two Sand Snakes and Lords Euronwood and Fowler. Fifth, 1 silver dragon for every released soldier will be paid. Although, that would in total consist of nothing more than some 40 golden dragons, it was symbolic that the Martells had to buy back their army. Sixth, they promised to gift them the bones of Gregor Clegane and Amory Lorque, as justice for the crimes they had committed against Princess Elia Martell and her children. Seventh, a war indemnity of 300,000 golden dragons was asked for the destruction of the Stormlands and the alignment with the Targaryen pretender. He also included that Aegon himself was most likely a Blackfyre claimant and not his nephew, after the confession of Harry Strickland. Yet, Varys still refused to speak for now. Seventh, they promised to pay 1/9 of the Iron Bank debt, according to their status as one of the 9 regions of the Old Kingdom. Finally, he agreed to send a diplomat to Storm's End to discuss trade relations between their kingdoms and start friendly relations. Both Lord Harold and Lord Davos brought forward on how they would distribute the ransoms and the indemnity payments. Seeing that the Stormlands needed to be repaired, yet he and Lord Harold also needed to fund their campaigns and reward their lords. However, they both agreed to the offer in itself. He immediately had the letter delivered to the Maester to be sent off. Afterwards, they discussed how they would divide the coin for a long time. In the end, they reached an agreement. The war indemnity would be split equally amongst the 3 of them. Although the Stormlands needed it more, this would compensate for the fact the other kingdoms had done most of the heavy lifting. The ransoms of the nobles would be given to those who had captured them, which greatly favored his own kingdom and that of the Vale. As his men had captured the vast majority of the Dornish nobles together with their infantry, while the Vale had captured most of the rest by defeating their cavalry and archers. Still, the Stormlanders would also greatly benefit with the capture of Arianne Martell, Tyen Sand and their escort. Especially House Swan and House Baratheon would win in this exchange. The symbolic payment for the soldiers would go to the Stormlands, seeing as they were captured on their lands. To make this deal, he had reminded Lord Davos and Lord Harold of how much of the Iron Bank he had taken upon himself and the fact that the former would not be helping to extract the parts from the Westerlands or Iron Isles. In the end, all parties were satisfied enough. Especially because the Stormlands would be receiving additional small plots of land. After all this was done, they also discussed the other news they had received together. Finally, their new sources in the Westerlands had come with information. It seemed that Tywin had ridden straight for Lannisport, after his defeat at the God's Eye River. He had merged his remaining heavy horsemen with the 3,000 to 4,000 levies under Sir Damian Lannister. However, not all was good for the Lannisters in the center of the Westerlands. Apparently, a third of his remaining 2,000 heavy horse had deserted him on the way there and they refused to go back. Those belonging to the houses whose lands they had raided stayed home under the guise of restoring order and defeating bandits. Apparently, Lord Spainfort, Kenning and the neutral House Prester used the same ruse, although they had only suffered some light raiding. Much more significantly was the disobedience from houses Crickehall, Serret, Leiden and Payne. Apparently, they had coerced most of their knights and riders to go home and refused to reassemble them under Tywin's leadership. Lord Payne had even gone as far as barricading his castle and preparing for a possible siege by his overlord. Other lesser houses all around the Westerlands had done much of the same. Their sources told them that Tywin only had the direct support of a handful of his bannermen anymore. Banners of houses Swyft, Myatt, Garner, Faen, Drox, Farman, Yarwick, Hugh, Kynal and Plum were still seen at Lannisport. Yet, none of them could be called one of the Lannisters' major vassals. All of those strong enough to defend themselves seemed to have abandoned the Old Lion. The problems for House Lannister didn't even stop there. None of his small folk were willing to join his forces anymore. This was because of their losses and the fact that he had sent their levies home without their sword hands after the Battle of the God's Eye River, a battle that was now universally called the Battle of the Lion's Flight. Tywin was now actively coercing his own small folk under arms, while they resisted the conscriptions. This not only weakened his force, it also slowed down his process of rebuilding it. Still, the Old Lion had tried to act. Apparently, he had marched out himself and burned a few lands of small landed knights. Afterwards, he had laid siege to the seats of houses Broom and Moorland, but for now both still resisted him. We must act now. The Lannisters have never been as weak as they are now. King Robb, with the captives you have in your possession, we can turn many of these houses against them. Lord Harold enthusiastically urged him. Aye, Lord Harold, but how do you suppose we do this? Our armies are occupied here in the Stormlands and we still have had no news of the battle between the Tiroshi fleet and Daenerys Stormborn. We cannot march upon the Westerlands, nor could I ride north to talk to those captives. He responded. The Lord of Vale was silent at that, clearly not having an obvious reply to that. It was Lord Davos that chimed in. Don't you have the lords and heirs of some of those disobedient houses? I do, why? He replied questioningly. Well, you could release those lords, whose heirs you have, back into the Westerlands. You keep their heirs and have them sign documents and swear some oaths that they'll pay a future ransom for themselves. If they fail to hold up to your demands, their heirs hang. In return, they can go west and start leading a more organized resistance against Tywin. You could even send some of their old levies with them to strengthen their cause. He thought about that. It wasn't so bad an idea. He would be able to send at least 3 or 4 of them back. Especially in the lands he had raided, they could further organize resistance against the Lannisters. I'll have to talk it over with my lords and advisors, but I'll look into it. He answered Lord Davos, who seemed content with that. Any more news? He asked them. Not much. The Golden Company garrisons refuse to surrender if the Pretender and Strickland are not handed over to them. So, we will have to grind through the castles still in their command. Lord Davos stated matter-of-factly. Which ones are those again? He responded, looking at the map of the Stormlands again. Crow's Nest, Mistwood, King's Mountain, Rain House and Weeping Town are still in the hands of either the company or their remaining allies. Lord Davos replied. He looked upon the map. All were positioned on the peninsula the Rainwood was situated on, that or the mountains connecting the peninsula to the mainland. If he partially divided his forces, they could reconquer all of them in one quick campaign. His supply lines shouldn't be a problem, as they already held Griffin's Roost for a land route and additional supplies could be delivered either by houses Swan and Caffin or be transported by their fleet. I suggest all of us discuss the issue with our respective commanders tonight. Let us say we meet here tomorrow at noon, together with 2 advisors each to decide upon our strategy for the upcoming campaign to free those lands and keeps. Both lords agreed and so they finally left the Solar. He went to look for Jon and found him talking to some of their friends in the Great Hall. Smalljon, Owen Neri, Daisy, Tor, Harry, Dom, Sir Wendell, Sir Lucas Blackwood, Sir Donal and Roose Ryswell were all seated at the table, laughing and shouting amongst one another. They were all sharing some ale, while he could see Ghost licking the carcass of some unfortunate chicken next to the table. Dom noticed him first. Your Grace, please join us. We found a few barrels of northern ale locked deep in the cellars. The ale lost a bit of its taste, but it's still way better than the piss they serve us here in the south. He smiled at his friends. May I ask, how you acquired said ale? We claimed it as spoils of war. The frightened steward didn't dare refuse us. Especially so after he saw Ghost silently stalking behind Snow here. The small John shouted out jovially, as he clasped John on the back. John looked sheepishly at him and shrugged his shoulders as if to say, "Sorry brother, I was thirsty." He rolled his eyes at his brother's antics. He might have liked him more when he was still shy and withdrawn. "Well, I'll make sure to look for the steward and pay for whatever damage you did to their cellar. See it as my treat." All his friends cheered. Free ale was free ale, he guessed. "However, first I'll have to sample what I'm paying for," he added, as he climbed onto the bench next to Sir Lucas Blackwood. This was cause for even more cheering from all his friends around him. "Lucas, I didn't know you were a fan of Northern Ale," he asked, as a fresh mug was quickly brought for him. "Well, these fine lads here have been telling me for months that it is an acquired taste. I came to the conclusion that it was time for me to start acquiring it." The Blackwood knight laughed and more cheers rode up as some clasped the Riverlander on his back. He started wondering just how long they had been sitting here and how much ale had already been spilt. "I'll drink to that," he responded, as he clasped his mug against his companion's. He had decided to drink a big gulp. However, after hearing Small John shout "Bottoms up, Your Grace," he thought to hell with it. He downed the entire mug to the entertainment of his friends. He was allowed one afternoon of fun after reconquering the Stormlands, wasn't he? Later that night, he sat alone with Harry, John and Toy in his rooms. He had postponed the meeting with his commanders, as most of his friends had been too drunk to be able to be of any value whilst discussing military plans. As his friends consisted of the leaders of the detachments of Houses Bolton, Dustin, Riswell, Locke and Carstark, as well as valuable commanders from Houses Umber, Norrie, Mormont, Marndale and Blackwood, it wouldn't do him good to hold a meeting like that. That's what he told himself at least, but if he was honest then he needed to admit that he also felt the world spinning a little. He looked upon his brothers, either by blood or marriage, and thought back on Alice. He longed to see her face again, hold her in his arms and kiss her. He thought back on the few nights they had shared together at Moat Cailin. 2 years later, they seemed like nothing more than faded dreams. At times, he had to remind himself they actually happened. However, they did happen. They had resulted in a child, his daughter Edara. The girl had already had her first birthday and he had missed it. She was walking now, Alice's letters told him. She had also started to talk. He had both laughed and cried when he had read her last letter. It had told him how her favorite word was wolf and that she played with Lady Nymeria, Summer and Shaggydote as if they were nothing more than puppies. Ever since Arya had gotten Nymeria so far as to allow Edara to ride on her back, she rode through the halls on one of their wolves half the time. He pictured a little girl looking like Alice riding on grey wind and tears came back to his eyes once more. Why was he here? Why couldn't he just go home? Why did they all have to keep coming? He had defeated the Lannisters, their allies from the Reach and the Vale, avenged his father and suddenly a pretender rises up in the Stormlands. He defeated him and his allies too and suddenly Daenerys Targaryen is coming to Westeros. Next up you had Tywin Lannister, who was rebuilding his army. Then he'd have to deal with the Ironborn. Would he ever go home? Or would he stay here forever, one of the corpses rotting in the southern mud? Never allowed to see his daughter, never able to hold his wife again. John noticed the change in his mood and walked over to him. He sat himself down on the free sat next to him and clasped his arm on his shoulder. "What's going on, Stark?" "I was just thinking about Alice and Edara. She has started walking and talking, you know. She apparently rides our siblings' wolves across the halls as if they were war horses going to battle. I just wished I could be there. I wish to be with them, not in these God's-forsaken lands in the south," he admitted. The Karstark brothers both turned to him with compassion and understanding. "We understand, Rob. It's not only your daughter. It's our niece too, and our sister. We would love nothing more than be with them. However, it was you that told us we had to see this through for them. That if we quit now, they will never be safe. As long as a Targaryen lives or Tywin Lannister draws breath, we will never know peace. Edara and thousands of other children will forever be in danger, the North will never be safe if we stop now," Harry told him. He was right. Of course, he was right. Yet, that didn't make it less hard to do. Both Karstarks hugged him, as they sat there in silence. He hated this damned war. He hated Daenerys Targaryen, he hated Tywin Lannister, he hated them all. He would destroy anyone that came between him and seeing his daughter, and once he got home, he wouldn't leave for a long time. That was a promise he made to himself. Chapter 57, Preparing for Dragons. 301 AC. Robb. It's as we feared. Lord Davos said, as he walked into the Solar in Storm's End. The de facto ruler of the Storm Kingdom had been away for just over a week. He had visited Evenfall Hall and the fleet that was docked there. He had been adamant that it was his duty to make sure the fleet was well provisioned and prepared for future battles in the Narrow Sea. She won? He asked, and the Storm Lord nodded in confirmation. That was to be expected by now. Lord Seaworth agreed with that. She has stopped her advance for now and seems to be regrouping on the Stepstones. It looks like some of the stranded Golden Company will be joining her there now that the Pretender was captured. Not that surprising either. That's why they had to get rid of all the ones that were still in the Stormlands now. Do we have any details on the battle? Some. The naval battle took place off the coast of Grey Gallows in the center of the Stepstones. Some 90 Tiroshi ships were deployed against her, less than a third of them seems to have survived the battle. Daenerys is said to have had some 30 to 35,000 men under her command, divided over 200 transport ships. Losses on both sides were very heavy. From what our sources tell us, the Tiroshi did a lot of initial damage. They managed to sink many troop transports carrying her freed slaves. This led to the deaths of thousands. Most of those poor souls would have never been on a boat before, let alone learned how to swim. Then how did they lose? He responded in thought. 35,000 was a much bigger army than he had been anticipating on. Luckily, she had lost thousands of followers. This was of course good news, yet he had no doubt that those wouldn't include her best troops like the Unsullied or Sellsword companies. That's where things get interesting. I spoke to the sailors myself a few days ago. Independently or in group, it doesn't matter, they all say the same. Lord Davos said with a cautious look on his face. He motioned for him to continue. Dragons, they all speak of dragon fire turning the tide of battle. That, together with a squadron of iron-borne longships that had originally been at their rear. He looked up. This was not the first time dragons were mentioned in reports about Daenerys. They had received a lot of similar notions since she had been spotted in Meereen. They had dismissed it as old wives' tales, but now he was beginning to wonder. The Ironborn could be easily explained as the remnants of the Iron Fleet that had once been sent against her. They say they have seen a dragon? He asked, while trying to wrap his brains around the ideas of dragons once again roaming these lands. Multiple, they say. They were all prepared to swear an oath on it, King Stark. The man said, as he ran his hand through his beard. He simply nodded in response. Seeing his reaction, the Baratheon regent exclaimed in shock. You can't seriously believe this. Dragons have been extinct for well over a century. They were killed off, either by the people of King's Landing or their own kinsmen, and with good reason. I can only agree with your latter assessment, Lord Davos, but it doesn't negate the fact that we have been hearing rumors of dragons for over a year now from every place she has passed through on her way here from Meereen. There are strange things happening in the world, maybe dragons are indeed back. He replied, as he looked at Grey Wind in front of the burning fireplace. His direwolf had been taking a nap next to the warmth of the fire, but as he looked at him, his companion's eyes opened. Those yellow eyes looked back at him with interest. It was as if he heard the direwolf's reply in his head. Grey Wind seemed to agree that dragons could exist once more. Now the old smuggler in front of him looked terrified. Let's say they do exist. What do we do about it? Well, first of all, we'll have to talk to those sailors again. We need to know how many there are and what they looked like. I'm willing to entertain the idea of dragons, but I doubt they will be as big as they say Balerion the Black Dread was. Especially not if they needed the help of a squadron of longships to win a naval engagement. Balerion could have easily destroyed such a fleet on his own, if the tales are to be believed. Multiple dragons needing help from ships tells us they might be terrifying, but not that terrifying. Once we know everything, we need to find a way to kill them and we need to prepare. In the meantime, we need to continue securing the Stormlands. Any enemies left here will simply be added to her army, a thing which we cannot allow. You're right. How goes the campaign in the Stormlands? Any new news since I left? Lord Seaworth asked, after he got hold of himself again. There has been news actually. As you know, Lord Morrigan had already taken Crow's Nest back last week. He has notified us that King's Mountain has now also surrendered to Houses Swan, Umber and Mondaly. Mistwood is still under siege by the Catherines, Boltons, Dustins, Riswells and the Flints of Widow Swatch. The same thing can be said about Rain House by Sir Andrew Estermont with the help of the Vale Houses Arryn, Royce and Hunter. Houses Waynwood and Redfort are still cleaning up the smaller keeps on Cape Wrath and the edge of the Rainwood. They have sent news that your family is healthy and is being brought towards Storm's End by a contingent of cavalry as we speak. Lord Davos looked pleased at that last comment. He could never imagine what the man had experienced. His 5 eldest sons had been killed in the Battle of King's Landing. On top of that, he also hadn't seen his wife or 2 youngest sons in 2 years. The Baratheon house owed much and more to this man and he respected him to no end for the sacrifices he had made for his overlords. If only the other Southerners had been as loyal, Robert Baratheon would still be on the Iron Throne today. He was suddenly interrupted from his thoughts. The plans for Weeping Town remain unchanged. As you asked. Houses Mallister, Bracken and Mallory are already marching towards there together with Lords Dondarrion and Tarth. House Whitehead will be made an example of. Unless, you wish to change them. He responded with a question. No, the Whiteheads have had too many chances already. They didn't abandon the Pretender during the battle. Yes, they lost their heir in the battle so they couldn't surrender, but afterwards in the weeks that followed they never came to Storm's End to pledge themselves to Queen Shireen nor did they respond any of our summons. They will serve as a reminder to all others not to cross her grace in the future. Their castle will be sacked, their male population will die or be sent to the wall and their females will be sent to join the sects. I only ask that the town be spared. It is not the people's fault and our kingdom needs every economic center it has left. Lord Davos stated very seriously. He nodded. He would probably do the same if it were up to him. He made a mental note to keep an eye on who would replace House Whitehead in the future. It was a small port that had many dealings with the Dornish, having a strong hand there in the future would benefit the country greatly and might help pacify relations in the region. There has been other news too. Apparently, I was right about there being underlying Targaryen loyalties in the former Crown lands. House Staunton was stupid enough to raise the 3-headed dragon and declare for the Pretender while we marched south. They raided lands on Cracklaw Point and around Duskendale with the aim of forcing those houses to join him and together cut off our supply lines. Lord Deddings has rapidly responded the threat. Their forces have already been destroyed and their keep has been sacked. Both the Lord and his 2 sons died in the fighting. Lord Deddings works fast, it seems. The old sailor commented. It was clearly visible he was intimidated by how fast his vassal could put down a small rebellion. That was good. They were allies, but the Stormlands shouldn't forget how they dealt with traitors and enemies in his kingdom. He does. He will be rewarded for it, be sure of that. He smiled in reply. He got a simple nod in return. Who's the heir to the lands now? Apparently, his 14-year-old niece. The former Lord Staunton had her betrothed to a Chelstead, but the lad had died in battle months ago. He responded. So, you'll marry her off to one of your own men? Lord Davos asked matter-of-factly. After all the years of serving under House Baratheon, nobody needed to explain him how the game worked. I will. I will decide on someone after the war with the Targaryen girl is won and I'm back in the Riverlands. I will discuss it with my uncles too, as House Tully will become their direct overlords. I will do the same for the Rosby, Hayford and Stokeworth successions, which will require my attention. I will also choose new rulers for the areas that now comprise King's Landing and its large surrounding areas, as well as the territories along our side of the Blackwater without a ruler. Many extinct or nearly extinct knightly houses will also need to be dealt with, but I hope that in most of those cases the local lords can fill in the vacuum. I'm sure they will appreciate the autonomy to do so. The Storm Lord looked at him and whistled. That's a lot of things you will have to deal with, but it brings a lot of opportunity too. Lord Davos seemed once again taken back by how fast he would expand his influence over the former Crown lands. He had to, if he wanted the lands to fully integrate into his kingdom in the next few decades. It does. It's the same as you did for Queen Shireen. You gave small plots of lands to her supporters, forfeited the lands of House Sunglass and gave them to Sir Andrew. You still have to deal with the lands of House Whitehead and the Caron succession, have forced Houses Connington and Fell to give wards and so on. He tried to counter diplomatically. Yes, but that comprises Queen Shireen's whole kingdom. You only talk about the Crown lands. I imagine you will apply the same diligence to the Riverlands with the inheritances of Houses Went, Free and their rebellious vassals and allies put into question. The older man countered. I will. I am just lucky so many of the former Crown lands houses seem to have only young female heirs. I won't say that I'm lucky with what happened in the Riverlands. Those betrayals cost me a lot of good men and friends, among them my father-in-law. I would rather have had less influence in the affairs of the lands and have them back than how it is now. He ended the conversation. He would not talk about the fate of the phrase just yet. His anger was still too great to make a clear decision that would be to the benefit of the whole kingdom. Lord Davos accepted that explanation. He changed the subject back to the Targaryen princess. What do we do with her? The fleet is ready to intercept her, but I don't know what we could ever do against Dragonfire with wooden ships. He put his hands through his beard, absently stroking the hairs on his chin whilst thinking it over. Losing the fleet for no gain would never be acceptable. However, that meant they would have to let her land. So be it. If she has dragons, the fleet has no use. It will only get destroyed. He summarized his thoughts. What do we do with it then? Even Fall Hall is too close to her forces not to attack it. The fleet can't stay there. The experienced captain brought up a thing he hadn't yet considered. We'll need to evacuate it. Dragonstone will probably be the best option. It'll shield their fleet from taking the island or King's Landing. I'll ask Sir Marlon to guide them there. If we can't intercept her, that means she will be able to land. I will need to start preparing to face her. We need to find a way to bring down those dragons. He responded, immediately taking charge of the situation. Lord Davos disagreed. If it's all right with you, King Robb, I will go back to Evenfall Hall myself and instruct them on what to do. Afterwards, I will come back here and help Shireen with her rule. I have no use on the battlefield. Lords Morrigan, Swan, Tarth, Sir Andrew and the others are all more suited to pitched battles and I would only be in the way. He nodded. The man obviously knew his limitations. No sane person would ever dare to accuse him of cowardice for this. Not after knowing that, after what he had survived on the Blackwater, he still led the coalition's fleet to victory over the Pretender's fleet. Afterwards, he had analyzed his battle plan from that naval engagement in detail. The plan had been excellent. It had made perfect use of both the terrain and their own strengths to win the battle. Lord Davos might not be much of an army commander, but the former smuggler was a terrific naval strategist. Very well. Anything else you can get out of those sailors will be useful too. I myself will talk to those in our army that have some experience with dragons. Who may those be? Lord Seaworth asked curiously. Well, on the top of my head I thought about asking Lord Celtigar. He is of Valyrian descent and his house has always been close with the Targaryens. Secondly, I wanted to talk to one of our prisoners. We have captured Sir Ulwick Eula, Lord Eulas' younger brother. The Eulas were the ones who killed Meraxes. If I have any hope of finding out how to kill a dragon, it's through the Eulas. He explained his plan. In agreement over their plans, they both left to accomplish their own tasks. He had to see Jon about the dragons first, maybe one of those journals and letters he took from the Targaryen dynasty could tell him anything. 2 weeks later. He looked over the terrain and the river he had chosen. It would do. The river ran from a spot on the border of the Rainwood northeast of Crow's Nest to Shipbreaker's Bay somewhere southeast of Griffin's Roost. They would hold the position here. It provided natural barriers, a good open plain behind the river for his cavalry to use and natural elevations and hills for his archers and artillery to fire from. The artillery had been the latest addition to his army. After speaking to a dozen people about dragons, he realized there were only two ways to stop them. Firstly, you get a lucky shot with artillery that pierces their scales, eyes or throat from the inside. If the dragons were fully formed, their scales would be too hard to penetrate, but it seemed the dragons were young, so maybe they had a chance. Secondly, you kill the rider. If you kill the one controlling the dragon, it would become wild and reckless. A frenzied dragon was a risk in itself, but it made it easier to target and bring down. He had started the construction of dozens of scorpions, as well as more tread buckets. Those still in King's Landing were on their way down here. His men were training with the machines daily, and he was still thinking on how to position them. His archers would be ordered to target the Dragon Queen if it ever came to battle. He had read the records of the Field of Fire in Storm's End and had made notes that the dry weather and grassland had made the onslaught much worse. He and his commanders had come up with the idea of hauling massive amounts of water from the nearby river to wet the fields around their archers and artillery on the morning before the battle. That would hopefully slow down fires. All companies would also be provided with buckets and reservoirs of water to douse possible fires and save burning men. His men had started digging small trenches and makeshift canals that would divert water from the river upstream to help in these endeavors. The cold weather would also help slow the fires, but it might also freeze the water in the trenches, so they had to be careful. All they could do was guess and prepare as best they could. No force had killed a dragon since the death of Meraxes almost 300 years ago. They had nothing to base their strategy on except rumors, tales and hearsay. All he knew was that they had to diminish the effects the dragon fire would cause, and they had to use a lot of projectiles to try to bring them down. For the first time, he doubted if he could win the coming battle. He could easily beat her forces. The unsullied and sellswords would be a problem, but they were too heavily outnumbered by his men. The freed slaves would be lambs to the slaughter when he set his cavalry upon them. On top of that, he could count on the fact that his heavy infantry would slice through them like a hot knife through butter if he asked them. No, dragons haunted his dreams, not enemy soldiers. At least he wouldn't make it easy on them. All enemy keeps had finally fallen in their hands. Most of the Golden Company members had died in the fighting or tried to flee in the forest. Those captured in the sieges had gotten the same choice as those captured in the battle. A few dozen were on the loose in the Rainwood, but they were inconsequential. He had ordered Rain House, Mistwood and Weeping Town to be evacuated. All its stores would be plundered and its contents would be brought back here to feed the army. Its citizens would be evacuated to areas around Storm's End for the time being. The enemy would find nothing to supply themselves with within 100 miles of their preferred landing site, which he believed to be Cape Wrath. He would try to exhaust and starve the enemy force before they met his own. All they would find is abandoned keeps, abandoned stores and strung-up traitors like House Whitehead. Their army would be well rested and entrenched behind the river, waiting on them. His supply lines were safe and adequately provided everything they needed. Only half the army was here now, but soon the forces he had sent out would converge back here. More and more Stormlanders were being raised as well, they trickled in daily. While their numbers wouldn't make the biggest difference, every bit helped. It mostly helped in matters of morale, as Northerners, Riverlanders and Valyman saw the Stormlanders were also prepared to fight for their homeland against the Targaryen threat. At the same time, he had allowed some 300 Stormlanders to leave the army and start reclaiming the keeps abandoned by the Dornish. The last thing they needed was a huge bandit plague in the Dornish marches after this. They would reclaim keep by keep and lightly garrisoning them as they progressed. No one should get any funny ideas who was in control of these lands. He was interrupted from his thoughts by Gruwind, who nudged him to look in front of him. He saw a rider approach wearing the colors of House Baratheon. He walked towards him. The man stopped, jumped from his horse and bowed respectfully towards him. "King Stark, I have a message for you from Lord Regent Seaworth. I was told to inform you they contain information about the situation in the Reach and developments with the prisoners," the messenger said, as he handed him a bunch of letters bundled together and closed with the Baratheon seal. He thanked the man and considered opening them immediately, but decided against it. He walked back to where Oliver was holding his horse for him. He looked upon the free man. Although he was his squire, his friend was a few years his elder. Many of his men had wanted to kill him or at least remove him from his presence, but he used all his power to keep him on. He would never forget how Oliver had saved his life from his kinsman at Atlanta. Oliver's full brother Superwin had died doing the same, or at least trying to protect his brother while he did so. Both would be praised and rewarded for it. One in life, the other in memory. Oliver had been very grateful to him, but he was just glad his friend had fully recovered from his wounds. He had done an excellent job so far and had long deserved his knighthood. However, he hadn't granted him it yet for selfish reasons. He didn't want to find a new squire or replace loyal Oliver. He looked at him, the lad was almost 20. He would grant it to him after the Targaryen battle. He would have enough time to look for a new squire before his Westerlands campaign started. "Is there anything amiss, your grace?" Oliver asked him. "No, nothing at all." He smiled back. He waited for him to climb his horse and together with some guards they rode back to camp. When they arrived, he sent those guards away to look for the commanders present while Oliver helped him prepare for the meeting. They grabbed maps from the Reach and spread them around the table in the center of the command tent. He put maps of the border regions of the Riverlands, Westerlands and Stormlands next to them. If things were to spill over, they needed to prepare. He finally opened the seal holding together the letters, quickly reading through all the information they had finally received from the Reach. It had long been their blind spot in Westeros. The lack of news had frustrated him to no end. As he kept reading, it seemed with good reason. The amount of information they had previously missed was ridiculous. The last pages he read actively shocked him. He managed to get a hold of himself again, just as the first nobles arrived. The commanders present arrived one by one. His brother, brother-in-law and great-uncle immediately took their positions close to him. They knew he wanted them close in meetings, as he trusted them completely. After the news he had just read, he appreciated it all the more. After everyone had taken his or her seat, he had wine and bread served. "Welcome my lords, news from the Reach has finally arrived. Many developments have been going on there, both with the Ironborn and between the factions themselves. Fighting has finally broken out in earnest." Lord Brynden Blackwood asked. For weeks and months all they had heard about were minor skirmishes and diplomatic moves like the marriage of Lord Tyrell. Now all it had changed. The problem was that much of this information seemed old, so they didn't really know when it had all started. It has. Some of the information is old, so it could have started weeks ago. We know for certain the Tyrells and Florence and their factions have started a major civil war. Barely any of the Reachmen seem to remain neutral and fighting has broken out across the kingdom. Minor battles between smaller families have happened from Tumbleton to the Honeywine River and from Red Lake to the Cockaleswent. It seems the whole kingdom has broken down into a major war zone. He started explaining the situation. "What of Randil Tarly and the army?" Lord Roger asked. He held up his hand in response. "We'll get there. First the situation with the Ironborn. After capturing most of the Arbor a few months ago, they have now completed the task and taken a hold of the rest. Minor skirmishes have happened between the Red Wine Fleet and the Ironborn, but both refused to commit to a big naval battle after the latter defeated the Hightower fleet. The Red Wines have attacked Dorne and taken Salt Shore as their base of operations. From there they raid the Dornish coast, while probing the Ironborn's hold over the Red Wine Straits. This came as a surprise to most. If you thought about it, it made some sense in a cynical way. The Red Wines needed a base of operation, as the Greyjoys clearly had a trap set around their home island. Dorne had declared for the Pretender which the Tyrells didn't follow, so it made sense. While the Crickens waited, the Reachmen didn't commit to the trap. The situation in Dorne could only help his negotiations with Doran, so he didn't much care. He still waited on the latter's reply. In the meantime, the Ironborn have been raiding the coast from Old Oak to Starfall with mixed success. Many keeps have fallen, yet some of those took great efforts and their attempts to sail far up the Honeywine and Mandaya have been thwarted. As it stands, the castles of Bunderlin, Blackcrown, Three Towers and Sun House have been sacked. The town of Kewy has fallen too, its population nearly exterminated by the Crickens. The same can be said about dozens of villages all around the Sunset Coast. This provoked more commotion, as many looked over the map of the southern reach. That many castles falling was a hard blow to the reach. Yet, there is better news for them as well. Attacks on old oak and minor castles at the mouth of the Mandaya have been repelled. The same goes for a major first assault on Old Town. Apparently, its harbour fell to the enemy and was almost entirely destroyed, but the high towers managed to keep control over the main city. The city remains in acute danger, yet it holds for now. They attacked Old Town directly. Lord Root exclaimed in shock. They did, unsuccessfully. He replied. Many of his men cursed at the prospect of the now biggest city in Westeros falling to the Ironborn. The Greyjoys have always been cravenly ambitious fucks who tried to raid the coast all along the Sunset Sea every time conflict engulfed Westeros, but to attack Old Town directly, never since the time of House Hoare have they made a move like this. Lord Flint remarked. Neither had they ever attacked Winterfell before, but here we are. He simply replied, his face hard as iron. He still had a bone to pick with the Greyjoys after what happened to Arya. They would get their due, sooner or later. Something will need to be done about those raiders. They have risen up too many times and they have gone too far this time. Master Robert Glover shouted over the rest. His wife and children had been besieged for months by the Greyjoys. Not a surprise that he wanted them dealt with. In truth, he shared his sentiments. Many lords from the north and the Riverlands shouted out their support for dealing with the Ironborn, but most of the Valyman and Stormlanders stayed silent. Both peoples hadn't had to deal with Ironborn raids in centuries. They only remembered them from the time they helped smash their rebellion almost 12 years ago. He decided to pacify things. The Ironborn will get their due, but first we need to deal with the Targaryens and Lannisters. Until then, I hope those Reavers and the Reachmen kill each other off. Both are our enemies, let them eradicate each other. This was met with mild agreement from most of his lords. The Reachmen have also been killing each other. Lord Tarly and his army are fighting rebels all along the North March. He has been seen both battling and negotiating with rebels in the area. However, he lost big parts of his 30,000-strong army. Months ago, he had already executed hundreds, if not thousands, of rebels. More have since been hanged. Yet, the biggest losses for him are the troops of Houses Redwyne, Hightower and their vassals. They have left the army and marched south to protect Old Town and its surroundings from the Ironborn. Although they have nominally sided with the Tyrells, they are de facto neutral now. Apparently, they even take care to not cross any of the Florents or their allies on their march south to preserve their hosts. Those are two of the strongest houses in the Reach. They aren't supporting the Tyrells. Lord Templeton exclaimed in surprise. Nominally they are, but effectively they are simply marching home. If Old Town were to fall, the damage to the Reach would be incredible. The whole Honeywine River would be lost. That would open up a quarter of the Reach to complete devastation by the Ironborn. It would also greatly increase pressure on the mouth of the Mandaya and in time threaten Highgarden itself. Whoever wins the civil war, if Old Town is lost, they will rule over ruins. The Florents know this and will most likely let them pass. He answered. What are the Florents and Tyrells themselves doing? Sir Donal Locke asked. The Florents have gathered a force together with House Mullador and are marching on Highgarden. They have just taken Dunstanbury, where they have been reinforced with a force from House Fossoway. Willers Tyrell has gathered an army of 8,000 strong at Highgarden to fend them off. It's expected they will clash soon. Mullador and Fossoway. Didn't we release some knights from those houses? Lady Mormont asked. He grinned. Aye, we did. It's apparently paying off. The Willem brothers and Lord Stefan Varner have also been fighting the Tyrell's allies, as have many of the knightly houses we set free as well. Many of his vassals laughed at that. All they had lost were minor ransoms, in turn they had managed to get the Tyrells into more trouble. The losses that would be taken by both sides in the Reach because of this were all soldiers that wouldn't ever be able to march against them. It also neutralized the Reach for a while, whoever came on top didn't matter. It meant none would be able to join the Targaryens or Lannisters, and that was the most important thing for him. What about Lord Cockshaw? The man ran away with his cock between his legs the moment he saw John on the field of gold. "What's that coward doing?" Owen Nuri joked to the enjoyment of many. "Not much, he seems to have holed himself up in keep. I think the man had enough of war after seeing his former allies be slaughtered whilst doing nothing himself." He smiled back and all cheered. Lord Fell looked a little awkward in the back, as they laughed with his former ally, but he said nothing. After their laughs died out, his great-uncle asked if there was any more news. "Aye, but not from the Reach. Varys has finally started talking." He turned serious, as he let that news sink in. Every man bended forward to listen to what he had to say, as they all knew something important was coming. "He has admitted the Pretender was a Blackfyr through the female line. Apparently, he is the son of Magister Iliomapatis of Pentos and his second wife Serra of House Blackfyr. The latter's father, Aemon Blackfyr, was a descendant of the youngest son of Daemon Blackfyr. She was born as a slave in Lies, after her father lost his fortunes, family and life after a rivalry against an opponent went wrong." He explained, to the shock of many. Incredibly, that is not the most shocking part of the Spider's revelations. It seems his real name is Varon, which he shortened to Varys during his time in Myr. Varon Blackfyr he was named. He is the brother to this Serra and uncle to the Pretender. As a eunuch, he never claimed his rights and pushed for his sister and nephew to continue the dynasty. He convinced his partner in Pentos, Ilio, to save his sister from a pillow house in Lies and marry her. They have been scheming for decades to put her progeny on the throne of Westeros. He told the tale that he had just read. Everything he ever did while being spymaster was weakening Westeros so his nephew would have a chance to come back and claim the Iron Throne. He intentionally told Rhaegar's plans to replace his mad father to Aerys before Harrenhal, as he didn't want the Targaryen dynasty to strengthen. He kept Rhaegar's whereabouts hidden during the beginning of the rebellion to sow dissent within the royalists. He fed Aerys' paranoia with tales about traitors hiding in every corner. He kept the story of Cersei's bastards from King Robert so he could use it against the dynasty when his nephew landed. He sowed dissent between everyone and the Lannisters and kept the schemes of former Targaryen loyalists hidden so they could flock to their banner when the time came. He even kept Daenerys Targaryen alive in secret, as they wanted her to marry the Pretender and unite the two sides of the dragon to further his claim. Everybody's mouth fell open. The eunuch had been weakening Westeros from the shadows for decades. All of that to put a child on the throne that hadn't even been born when he first became spymaster for the Mad King. It was a kind of scheming even the South was not used to. "You're telling us that we had a Blackfyr on the small council for over 2 decades. Sir Rupert Brune called out. "Aye, he has been deceiving everyone for years. It was always his mission to put Aegon on the throne. Every decision he ever made lead up to that point. The list of actions mentioned here is shockingly large and Lord Seaworth writes that he believes there is more." He explained, as he picked up the letter and reread some parts of it. He intentionally created animosity between Queen Cersei and King Robert's brothers. He did the same for my father and many others. Knowing of the unusual preferences of both men, he convinced Robert to have Loras Tyrell squire for Renly Baratheon. He filled both their heads with stories of greatness and glory, while isolating Stannis as much as possible in court as he knew Stannis would be the real heir when everything came out. He did everything he could to fragment House Baratheon and alienate them from each other. He did nothing when Jon Arryn was murdered by his wife, nor did he save my father from the fate he knew was coming. All he wanted to do was create a time of instability and chaos, so the people would think back on the time when the dragons ruled and welcome it back when it came under his nephew. All nobles looked at each other in shock. In his tent former Targaryen loyalists were present, as well as rebels. All looked shocked. "Are you telling us, the rebellion might not have even happened without that eunuch?" Lord Fell exclaimed. His family had lost much and more since the rebellion and he had recently lost even more now because he had joined the Pretender for a time because of that history. Difficult to say, he shrugged. Aerys would always have been mad, but maybe Rhaegar would have managed to depose him without the Spider's interference. Maybe if he hadn't, his antics with my aunt and their whereabouts would have come to light sooner, allowing them to pacify things before my uncle Brandon arrived in King's Landing, or maybe not. We'll never know for sure. He responded honestly, looking to Jon with pity. His life could have been a lot different without this scheme in place. Many lords started screamed, others threw their fists on the table and complete chaos broke out. Former rebel and loyalist families looked at each other in shock, thinking their families had killed and died for nothing. They would need a lot of time to process all of this. Yet, knowing there had been an exterior puppet master pulling strings might help to mend historic rifts between some families. He would also give them the satisfaction of knowing they would meet their fate. The order has been given that Varys and the Pretender will be questioned until Daenerys comes. The moment she sets foot on West AOC soil, both their heads will be taken off. We will not risk the possibility of them falling into her hands and spinning tales as they see fit. However, Lord Seaworth believes there is still more information to gather, and I agree. None of the lords disagreed, which was a good sign. What of that Pentosi Magister? Sir Eamon Estermont asked. He seems to be one of the wealthiest merchants in Pentos. After the war, we will probably boycott his trade. Maybe all the kingdoms together can apply enough pressure on the Prince of Pentos to get rid of him. We'll have to see. The Pretender doesn't have any other siblings and his Black Fira mother is long deaf, so he at least can't start another one of these schemes. They seemed to accept that answer for now. None wanting to start another war, especially with one of the free cities. They talked some more amongst each other about the developments of the coming battle and their defenses against Daenerys. They were all done with dragons, be they red or black. They and their ambitions for a unified Westeros under their control would end in a few weeks on the field a few miles from here. He swore to that. None of his sons would ever have to deal with another dragon claiming anything again. Chapter 58, Conflict at Home. 301 AC. Bran. He was eating lunch in the great hall of his home. He ate together with Alan, as they had both come from practice before. Sword practice was more difficult now due to all the snow and ice that covered the training yard. The cold also chipped away at his stamina. It crept into your bones, and he had thanked the gods for the hot stew that was in front of him now. He looked at the other side of the hall. The torchlight made shadows against the walls, but they were not what he was looking at. In front of the wall was his mother. She seemed angry again. There had been a lot of tension in the keep ever since the rumors of Jon had started. He knew Mother hadn't wanted for them to hear them, but he and Arya had teamed up together to find out. Arya had hidden herself and eavesdropped on people, while he had done the same whilst climbing. They had also taken possession of Summer and Nymeria to hear what the guards had been talking about. Apparently, Jon would have dressed in Targaryen armor during a battle. People were saying that he wasn't their brother, but the son of their Aunt Lyanna and Rhaegar Targaryen. Arya had thrown a tantrum when she had heard the news, but he had managed to calm her. If Mother had seen her, she would have known they had eavesdropped. Arya didn't believe a word from it, but he didn't know what to believe. Everyone in the keep seemed to think it was true. His mother had been angry ever since the rumors had started to circle. She had had multiple fights with Aelys in private, and even now she had a scowl on her face. He was interrupted from his thoughts by his sister and her closest friend running towards him. She jumped on the bench next to him. "Bran, a raven has arrived," Arya whispered in his ear when she was close enough. He snapped his neck towards her. "Truly?" She nodded. I saw it with my own eyes." His eyes went wide, as he thought about what it meant. Could it be Robb's? His sister nodded enthusiastically. The whole castle had been waiting for news from the king for days now. Already rumors were flowing in, as it seemed Castle Sewin and other vassals had received news before them. He looked at his friend in front of him and nudged him that they needed to go. "What about our food, Bran?" The Blackwood responded. He looked down at the stew, grabbed his spoon and wolfed it down in a matter of seconds. "There, you do the same. We need to leave, now." His friend did as he was told. Together they almost ran out of the hall. From the corner of his eyes, he saw how a servant walked over to his mother. She would probably be called to the Maester's turret at once. That was a good sign. It meant that the message the raven brought was important. They ran outside into the courtyard. Normally, he would scale the bell tower and cross the bridge to the rookery to eavesdrop there, but it was too dangerous with all the ice now. Instead, Arya and he hid themselves in the stables, as they took command over their direwolves. Alan and Lyanna would watch over them like they had done many a time now. They were the only ones that knew about their warging, but they had sworn on the gods to never tell a soul. Lionel had been the easiest, as she had told them how stories about wargs were still freely told among Bear Island. Included in those were stories that some of her ancestors were allegedly capable of commanding brown bears in battle. He closed his eyes and opened them as Summer. It took him a second or two to adjust himself to the nature of the wolf, before he was ready. Arya and Nymeria needed some more time, but eventually they raced towards the wall together. They ran atop the stairs and scaled the walls. Some two-leggers with the pointy sticks looked at them strangely, but no one dared to disturb the direwolves of Winterfell. He almost smirked, if only they understood what was happening. From the outer wall they ran atop the inner wall to the bell tower. Outside the door was another one with a pointy stick. At the sight of them, he almost seemed to shit his pants. Once both him and Nym started growling lightly, the two-footer let them pass. They raced upwards until they were on the bridge connecting it with the rookery. There they halted and pricked up their ears. They were positioned just around the corner from the Maester's turret, and the direwolf's superior hearing could faintly make out the conversation inside. The robed two-footer was talking. The other person in the conversation was the mate of the one that had left, the oldest of the pack. She was the mother of the she-pup that his master was so fond of. He forced himself to take more command of Summer and focus on the conversation. "So, the rumors are true?" he heard the mate say. "Yes, Your Grace. It seems that the king has proof that Jon Snow is Lyanna and Rhaegar's son." Only silence was heard after that, until he heard a door open. Another female voice broke the silence. "Is it from Robb?" No one answered, but he heard the faint sound of paper waving around. This can't be. This must be a joke. Ned would never, he wouldn't have lied. He couldn't. No, that boy, no, this is impossible. The mother of the pack exclaimed. She had been the mate of the former leader of the pack, and he knew his master loved her dearly. "It is, my lady. His Grace would not lie. He even used it in his battle strategy. It seemed to have worked, as multiple lords fled the field before the battle. He won. Is he all right?" Two voices answered positively, and he could hear a sigh from up above. "What are we to do with this?" his master's mother exclaimed. Robb left instructions further on in the letters. "I propose you read them all in silence, Lady Catelyn. We will discuss it once you have all the information." He looked over to his sister, and she looked back at him with big eyes. They wanted to hear what they would decide, but it seemed they had to wait for a bit. No matter, they could wait. After a while, they were suddenly interrupted. "Summer, Nymeria, get down from there!" a female voice screamed from inside the yard. It was the other female of his master's pack, the one with the auburn hair. His other sister was with her, the calm one. The auburn two-legger was holding the pup in her one arm, and she held the paw of the last male of the pack at her side. His brother was next to him, the wild one. Their black wild brother was running around the yard, waiting for them to come down to play with him. The auburn two-legger once again screamed for them to come down and where their masters were. He looked into his sister's eyes and saw how her master had gone from it. He thought about his body lying in the stables. "Get down, Summer, I'll wait on you in the courtyard." He opened his eyes and found himself back in the stables with Arya bowing over him. She looked at him as to ask if he was all right. He nodded and took her hand. They walked over to Alyn and Lyanna together and ran outside into the yard. There he could see Sansa standing with their Dara and Rickon. The looks she gave them on arriving said more than enough. She knew. Not much later, Summer and Nymeria ran across the yard towards them, and he hugged his direwolf. His companion was the same height as him now. From Robb's letters he knew he could surpass him again when he was older, as Grey Wind and Ghost were smaller than his brothers when they stood up. Sansa looked sternly at them. "Come to my room tonight, just the two of you. We have to talk." His older sister looked at him sternly. They both nodded in resignation, but Arya looked mad. "What is it, Arya?" their sister asked. "It's true, about Jon. He lied to us. He is Aunt Lyanna's son and not father." She almost whispered, making sure none of the guards or servants could hear it. Sansa looked upon her in shock but nodded. "We can ask Aelys soon, she will not lie to us. That was a good idea. Rob's wife had found her place in the family ever since little Edda had been born. Speaking of their niece, the little one disturbed them as she shouted "Wolf, wolf," loudly over and over again. Nymeria freely walked over towards Sansa and their niece petted the direwolf with a huge smile on her face. She proudly proclaimed "Wolf" once more, as her hands softly hit the beast's fur. Arya walked over to her. "Edda, do you want to ride?" The smile and giggle Rob's daughter gave in response was one of the most adorable things in the world as she nodded. Arya took her from Sansa, who complained that Mother wouldn't like it. "Mother isn't here. Besides, Edda is a Stark. She has nothing to fear from the direwolves. Nymeria will not let her fall." Arya responded decisively. The little one's fists grabbed onto the grey fur, as Lady Summer and Shaggydock greeted the little Stark's presence. They started slowly walking her across the yard, careful enough so she wouldn't fall while still giving her the pleasure of a lifetime. Arya looked at them and he could see her considering to ride her companion into battle or something once again. "No, Arya, you're too fat for her to carry you," he teased. His sister scowled and stuck her tongue out. They played in the yard together as a family for the next few hours. The castle children and Wyler Mandaeli also joined in. Both Rickon and Edda greatly enjoyed the castle's company. Besides, Arya said Jonel was almost family by now. Wyler was by now both a friend of Arya and Sansa. Afterwards, Sansa, Arya and he accompanied Alis to Wintertown. She would hand out food to many of the poorest citizens and refugees that had come here for the winter. The last few months she had ordered extra houses to be constructed and it seemed like it was worth it, as almost all of them were filled by now and more people still arrived every day. On Rob's orders she had also started overseeing the build of 2 great orphanages, one for boys and one for girls. Both housed some 250 children now between the ages of 8 and 14. Most of those were the arrivals from King's Landing, but some were northerners orphaned in the war. The southern arrivals had been 12 years old and younger, as apparently his brother wanted them to have time to learn how to be a northerner before they got to work. He had asked Alis and Maestlawin what that practically meant, being a northerner. Both had laughed and told him to think of the differences between him and the local boys in Riverrun. That he understood, they had some weird customs over there. Even if he had been very happy with his grandfather and uncles. He knew that his mother had wanted to visit them with the Septon when they had first opened, but Alis had stopped her. Rob's orders were that no Septons or teachings of the Seven were to be allowed in their upbringing. She had been very offended at that, but Alis hadn't given in. Since then, Mother had rarely gone to visit the orphanages. However, Alis had been adamant that the women of House Stark should be seen caring for the orphans. Both to show the small folk their house's generosity and soften the voices that were critical of importing Andal children. She had also forced him to come along some of the times, as he was still the crown prince. He really disliked both the title and the responsibilities that came with it. He hoped Rob would soon return and that Alis would get pregnant with a little boy. That way, he could still become a knight or maybe a lord without having to be brought into town, meetings or hearings every other day. It could also give Rickon another friend, that way he could have more time to climb when he wanted to. More orphanages were being constructed now. Rob had sent 1,000 children from King's Landing and another 200 or so had come from the north itself, either from the lands of House Stark itself or those of House Glover. The latter didn't have an orphanage and it had always been custom that some of the people of the Wolfswood found refuge in Wintertown during the winters. Maestlawin had told him more from the clans would still be arriving. A third orphanage for boys from the ages of 3 to 8 years old had recently been opened. Its female counterpart would soon open as well, as would a joined one for babies until they became 3 years old. The first 2 would house another 300 children each, while the oversized nunnery as Arya called it would support the same amount another time. The others would also be expanded on further in the near future. When he had asked Alis why she was doing this, as it exceeded the demand for now, she had sadly smiled at him. The war isn't over, Bran. More children become orphans every day. Besides, winter and sickness will also take its toll on the people. It's better to be prepared to help those children beforehand than have to put them in the cold while still trying to house them. He knew what she was talking about with that last sentence. As the orphans from King's Landing had arrived, there had been too many for them to house. Many had stayed for months with local families in turn for extra food rations. That was still the sad situation for many girls under the age of 8 years old, although smilingly Alice had also told him some had been adopted by local families. The personnel Alice found in the local communities around Winterfell. Young widows without any children of their own, old shrews whose daughters and sons had families of their own now. Local boys and men had been hired to help as well. Alice had financed it all from his family's coffers, as Robb had demanded. However, Mayor Stillowin had shown him how smart that logic was. The economic benefit it brought the local communities was big. Local builders, lumberjacks, joiners, carpenters, weavers, tanners and others had been swimming in work these past few months to house and clothe those children on top of their usual work. This brought Wintertown to life and served as an incentive for locals to come and find work in the town. The biggest benefit would be the extra benefit when they got older, as all those children were learning skills from the ages of 8 to be able to fit in northern society. Alice had showed him how local blacksmiths, tanners, stonemasons, millers, weavers, roofers, farmers and many others had regularly come to the orphanages to help teach the boys. Mayor Stillowin and Mother had explained him that in turn they gained cheap assistance when the boys became 14. The boys could also leave the orphanages and work on peak times for them for a few days to help their businesses as they got experience in their trade. The farmers had already been promised as much for their first harvest in spring. He had been mesmerized by the thought his new sister had put in it with Mayor Stillowin, especially as Winterfell was still without an official steward after the death of Jane's father in Winterfell. Even the captain of the small town watch came to look at some of the stronger boys sometimes to possibly recruit 1 or 2 in the future. Arya hadn't been that impressed though. When she had asked what the girls were learning, Alice had simply answered that most were being groomed to marry and run their families. Some would be trained to be midwives, servants for Winterfell or to help in farms, but most would be expected to stay home and start a family. His sister had scoffed at that, but he could feel that she felt pity for them. Father had always indulged in her and Robb had given Alice and Jonelle instructions to do much of the same, especially after the attack. Since then, even their mother let her do most of the time. These girls would never have that luxury. Once, Sansa had asked how she would ever find a suitable husband if she was more versed in wielding her dagger than running a household. Jonelle had laughed at that and had told her that many northern boys from houses like Umber, Glover or the clans wouldn't mind her wielding a weapon. Arya had smugly laughed at Sansa then, but the smile had quickly disappeared when Jonelle had quickly added that she could wield a weapon only on the condition she also knew how to run a household. After that, Arya had been forced to do needlework for 3 consecutive days after her weapon training to drive the point home. Even Sansa seemed to have accepted the method, which said a lot. Both his sisters had slowly grown closer for the last 2 years, to the pleasure of the whole family. They were still very different and they often bickered, but more out of annoyance than in malice. Ever since Sansa had sent Lady to protect her and her friends from the Greyjoy attack, Arya had started to respect Sansa more. He had asked her about it and she had responded that she had realized that their sister would do everything to protect her and the pack just like they would. She had just scoffed that Sansa couldn't do much and hated the fact she wasn't interested in learning more like fighting. Yet, it seemed enough for them to grow closer it seemed. The birth of their little niece had also helped. Ever since the birth of Edda, he had noticed how the whole castle seemed happier. Especially his mother and sisters, who could play with her for hours. It was funny, the little girl went from clapping at Sansa's and Mother's embroidery to roughhousing with Arya and Rickon and the wolves in the yard. Both Sansa and Mother had scolded Arya after she had led Edda ride Nymeria for the first time. Even Alice had seemed scared and unsure. Yet, his stubborn sister hadn't relented and insisted Nymeria thought of her as part of the pack and would never hurt her. Soon the little girl was heard laughing and riding through the halls to the astonishment of all present. By now, everyone had gotten used to it and only Mother and Sansa still rolled their eyes or become annoyed. However, he had noticed how even their eldest sister had allowed Lady to cuddle and roll around with Edda when she thought they were alone in her chambers. Even Mother had laughed aloud when the pup had pointed to Nymeria and loudly exclaimed "Wolf Edda horse." Nymeria seemed fine with being called the pup's horse. Even though he missed Father, Robb and Jon greatly, they were happy. He thought about father every day and made sure to talk about him with Rukun as much as he could, as the boy almost seemed to forget about who he had been. The whole family celebrated his brother's victories with a small feast every time the news came in to stay connected to them. Regular correspondence in letters did the rest, and they all trusted more and more that Rob and John would manage to come home in time. His brothers, or brother and cousin, he still didn't know what to think about that news. Arya had been the most unhappy for a long time. She had been restless after she had healed from the attack. Only when both Greyjoys had been put in the cells of Winterfell had she allowed herself to open up again. He was glad. He loved his sister and had the best bond with her out of all his siblings, but he hadn't wanted her to be this angry all the time. She still wanted the Greyjoys dead, but had at long last accepted they had to wait for Robb. He then spent some time giving out food and talking with some of the boys his age. On their way home, Arya confronted Alis on the news and she seemed shocked and had asked how she knew. He had come to his sister's rescue and had just scoffed they all knew. Alis seemed to accept that, but Sansa looked very suspiciously at both of them. Alis had explained everything and confirmed it was true. Arya had angrily asked if she could write a letter to Jon about it and their sister-in-law had agreed. However, Mother didn't agree with this when she came home. As soon as she had heard, she had yelled at his sister. "Arya Stark, you will not disobey me. You will not send any letters to that bastard, unless I allow it, and I won't." He had been shocked by this. Both had started yelling at each other and he found himself once again coming to his sister's rescue. "Mother, when I was fostered at Riverrun, Father demanded from grandfather and uncle that I would be able to write to family every time I wanted. Not only home, but also to Carhold, to Robb, or to Jon in White Harbor. He did the same for them when they left, and even for Sansa when she was in Barrowton. Even Arya's friends have never been obstructed to write home. Father would want us to be able to write to Robb and Jon." His mother looked strangely at him and he could see a tear forming in the corner of her right eye at the mention of his father. He is not your brother apparently. So, that doesn't count anymore." She weakly countered. He had never seen his mother so emotional and thought it strange. Even stranger had been that only Arya really seemed to understand her. Father lied to her for over a decade, of course she is angry and hurt. She had told him this afternoon and he kept that in mind. He simply looked at their mother. "If he isn't our brother, he is still our cousin. Either way that makes him family and part of the pack. The pack should stick together, even when they are angered or hurt by each other." His mother scoffed. "You and your sister with that damned pack mentality. Sometimes, you act more like wolves than like people because of it." "Mother, you are wrong." Sansa responded to everybody's surprise, not in the least Mother, who seemed in shock. "What do you mean, Sansa? We are a pack. Father always said so. Grandfather Rickard told him the same when he was young, and all Starks before them told their children the same. Ever since the direwolves came to us, it's even more true. We all got a direwolf, so did Jon. This is no accident or coincidence. Ghost is different, yes. He looks different and never makes a sound, but he is still part of their pack. Apparently, Jon is different too, but in much the same manner he is still part of our pack. Father always said that the lone wolf dies and the pack survives. When I was in King's Landing, Lady hated it there. She only seemed content when Father was around, and I think she missed her siblings, as I did mine. The worst of it was on the boat to White Harbor, and the joy she felt when she finally saw Nymeria and Shaggydoug again was the same I felt when I saw Arya and Rickon. None of us have been alone since Bran got home, and because of it the pack survived. It even protected Arya from the Ironborn," their sister explained, as she looked at Arya. "Robb has fought in the south for Father's memory, for us and for the north for 2 years now. He has done amazing things and we all love our brother, but he didn't do it alone. He always had help. Partially from houses Tully, Karstark and many other loyal vassals, but also from Jon. Robb was never a lone wolf. They fight together, and from Robb's letters it seems he trusts Jon as he does no other. Robb probably knew the news long before that battle, yet he didn't care as Jon is part of the pack. The lone wolf dies. Father was a lone wolf in King's Landing after he sent me home and he died. Robb and Jon are not alone and they will bring each other home together. I've never had the best relationship with John, but alienating him would leave Rob alone. You have the right to be angry and sad on father and even on Rob and John, but I will never support a decision that would leave Rob alone after all he has done for us. No one deserves to be a lone wolf, and I want my brother to come home safely to us. Edara deserves to grow up with a father. All looked at Sangza in shock. She had always been the most like mother and had always insisted on calling John their half-brother in the past. For her to go against mother in this way was as likely as the old gods showing up on their doorstep in the flesh, or so all of them would have thought but a minute ago. Mother was completely taken aback, while Arya's shock slowly seemed to make way for something like respect and pride. He felt much the same, as did the direwolves. He could feel what Summer felt. Sangza probably had the same with Lady. Something pulling in the back of his mind made him look over towards his direwolf. He sat on his hind legs, Nymeria and Lady in an identical pose next to him. Just as he, Arya and Sangza looked over, they all raised themselves up and howled loudly. Within mere moments another howl could be heard from the other side of the castle, as Shaggydoke joined in. They looked silently at each other and soon Rukan and Shaggy came running over, while Alis arrived with Edara in her arms. What is going on here? Alis asked in confusion. Edda heard the howls and she screamed for the wolves until I went outside to meet you. She wanted to be with the pack. Arya just smiled knowingly. Edda smiled at all of them and stretched her arms for Mother to pick her up. She did so, the sight of her granddaughter clearly having an emotional effect on her. Rukan ran over and he played his hand through the curls of his younger brother, as they both laughed. The 4 direwolves sat around them proudly and his mother looked flabbergasted at the scenes in front of her, while Edara looked happier than ever in her arms surrounded by the rest of the family. In the end, she just sighed. You can send your letter, Arya. I will write my own to Rob. She then looked upon all of them and finally on Sangza. We need to have a serious conversation about you and your wolves, but not here. I demand you tell me what's going on and soon. He and his sisters looked at each other and they just nodded. As Mother walked off towards the keep with Edda, Rukan pulled on his arm. What does Mama want to know about the wolves, Bran? Is there something with Shaggy? He smiled at his little brother. No, Rukan, nothing is wrong. Mother just doesn't understand our bond with them because she has no wolf and she wants us to explain it to her. Rukan turned his head slightly and a small frown decorated his forehead as he thought deeply. Like how when I'm angry Shaggy is angry too. Exactly like that, nothing more. You are not in trouble, this time. He winked at him and Rukan stuck his tongue out in response. He had to laugh at the sight and pulled his little brother closer to him. Suddenly, he aggressively scratched his head as he started laughing louder. Hey! Rukan shouted, trying to do the same to him, but he just ran away laughing. His wild brother ran behind him whilst shouting, as Summer and Shaggy joined their banter and started playfully nipping at each other. Chapter 59, The Dragon Queen. 301 AC. John. He walked through the village towards the center building. When it had become clear that Rob would be taking command of this area for a while, a small village to the north of their prepared battle line had been occupied as a command post. Rob had taken the main townhouse as a control center, as it could host most of the lords in its downstairs area. He walked inside, soon being greeted by most of the northern and riverland nobility as he walked through the room. He looked over the maps of the Stormlands scattered around the tables in the center. They had been tracking Daenerys' progress for a while now. She had landed at Cape Wrath some 2 weeks ago and had since then spread out over the peninsula. She hadn't found much though, as all important settlements had been evacuated and even many smaller villages as well. Desperate to gain supplies, her armies had ventured further and further. They had long passed Rain House, where they'd found nothing. The same had happened for them at Mistwood and Weeping Town. They had taken most of the Rainwood, although small groups of Stormlanders had fought guerrilla warfare against their foraging parties there. A few score Golden Company members that had hidden in the forests had joined her, but they were of no consequence except for the intel they could possibly give her. She had been inching ever closer to their position, which she should be fully aware of by now. Dragons had been seen across Shipbreakers Bay multiple times, confirming their existence. He had no doubt she was using them to scout the land. Their army was prepared. 74 scorpions lined the hills, together with 11 tread buckets. Trenches were dug all over. Reservoirs of water had been filled with molten snow and preparations had been made to easily divert parts of the river towards their chosen field of battle. Their army was ready too. Rob controlled his biggest force until now here. 36,000 troops were under his command. It consisted of 10,000 Northerners, 7,000 Riverlanders, 3,000 from the Northern Crown Lands and Cracklaw Point, 10,000 Valiman and 6,000 Stormlanders. The latter had been arriving in small groups over the past weeks until they finally compromised a substantial part of the force. Their own part of the force had been diminished, as Rob had systematically transported the wounded back towards the Blackwater via their supply route garrisons. Officially, this was because most of these men would be liabilities, but in private Rob had told him he wanted to spare some more of his veterans as he was sick of always receiving the brunt of the casualties. As such, a force of around 1,500 veterans, most of them from the north, had been transported to King's Landing piecemeal. They helped stabilize the situation there, as the remaining population was still restless and starving. Besides, none of them were archers or artillery crews, which meant they could do little against the dragons anyway. Even after this, 20,000 of the men still swore loyalty to Rob. His brother had leveraged this numerical importance to siphon away those veterans, and no one dared speak up against it. He walked over to his brother. "What's the latest news?" Rob didn't even look up, still studying the map of the local area in front of him. Her dragons have been seen circling the entire area this morning. Guards from Griffin's Roost even swear they spotted a figure on the largest one's back. It won't be long now. She's close. He nodded. They had been prepared for this ever since she landed. What of her army? All the latest reports confirm each other. The most accurate estimates of her forces have her army at 5,000 elite unsullied, 1,000 veteran Golden Company members, 3,000 veteran sellswords, and the remaining 18,000 or so are freed slaves from all over with mixed experience and equipment. That force shouldn't be able to stand against us. He summarized what they all thought. They outnumbered them in absolute numbers, as well as heavy cavalry. Their forces were more disciplined and generally had more experience. Their cohesion was also better, as would be Rob's command. It shouldn't. His brother confirmed. Yet her 3 dragons changed the whole situation. It's confirmed there are 3 now. A cream one of green and bronze, and the largest is red and black. She seems to ride the latter. Rob sighed. The Targaryen colors, that's an ominous sign. He thought aloud. Rob simply acknowledged. On the field of fire, the combined Lannister and Gardener forces consisted of 55,000 men. The Targaryen force only counted some 11,000 forces of recently beaten lords. They were handily defeated, until the 3 dragons showed up. They burned thousands alive and won them the day and the submission of the Westerlands and the Reach. You can't seriously compare those 3 to the legendary Balerion, Vigor and Meraxes. They were huge. He exclaimed. I don't. If they were comparable, I wouldn't be preparing for battle with them. He added silently so only he could hear him. He looked in shock towards his brother and could see the lines of worry in his face. He had seen them before these past weeks, yet they seemed all the more prevalent. Together with his ever wilder growing beard, it made him look far older than his 18 years. He decided to switch subjects. Anything else I should know about? Rob thought for a while before speaking. Lord Dondarrion arrived yesterday evening with 300 men. He nodded. 300 wasn't much for a family the size of House Dondarrion, but considering that they would have lost men and resources at both Blackwater Bay and because of the Dornish invasion, it was understandable. They also needed to fortify their stronghold against any future Dornish aggression. Not a bad number, all things considered. His brother looked up towards him. But it's not the number that got me thinking. It's the kind of troops he brought that surprised me. He simply raised an eyebrow, knowing full well the comment would soon be explained. 50 of those are Dornish. They belong to House Dane to be exact. The young Lord Edric Dane was Lord Dondarrion's squire for years. His sister was set to marry the Storm Lord. The young lord was freed by Oberyn Martell in King's Landing and had marched with the Dornish army. He took up command of the garrison of Blackhaven himself. The people there knew him, and he apparently treated them with great respect and courtesy. After he got our order to evacuate the castle, he did so, but he left his sister in the castle to await Lord Beric's arrival. Apparently both houses have made their peace and have gone as far as to confirm the betrothal and set a wedding date. In turn, Dane has sent those men with Dondarry on to protect him in battle. His only condition seems to be that none of his men are to ever fight any Dornishmen. Well, that's easy, she doesn't have any. He grinned and his brother smiled back. But it gets even weirder. Dondarrion has apparently pleaded with Lord Morrigan for him to release the Dane prisoners and to let them fight as part of his contingent. All of them? He exclaimed. Robb nodded. Some 600 or 700 in total. However, most of them are our prisoners, not those of the Stormlords. What are you going to do with it? He asked. I'm going to risk it, although they will be put next to loyal troops wary of a possible betrayal. I won't get surprised again. His brother decidedly answered. Then why allow it at all? Firstly, it means less of our men have to die. We have lost too many of ours already. I won't lose any more if I can help it. Secondly, because of the political implications. It would allow us to present ourselves as a combined West AOC force against her foreign SOZ invasion in the negotiations. Our coalition would consist of 6 of the 9 former West AOC regions. If we're honest, nobody cares about the Ironborn, so they don't count. The Reach is both enduring an invasion and a civil war, and the Westerlands is much the same. We could stand tall against her, that everybody who can stand against her is doing so, and nobody in West Aos is waiting for another Targaryen monarch. He thought it over. It wasn't a bad idea. Seeing the banners of former loyalists from all over West Aos united against her could deter her. She probably grew up thinking of West Aos reigned over by rebels. Seeing houses Daeari, Rajar, Mutan, Dane, Rhaegar, Brune and others against her should make her see sense on that point at least. Although he doubted whether it would deter her from trying to conquer the continent. Seeing as she could finally arrive at any moment now, I have gift for you. His brother said, breaking up his thoughts. A gift? He questioned. Let's say it has both a practical and political purpose to me and both a practical and emotional value to you. This got him confused. Robb signaled Smalljan to bring something from the other room. He walked in carrying a sword, in full ornament sheath. As the Umber heir handed it to Robb, he realized with shock that it was Blackfyr. Seeing his reaction, his brother smiled. You swore before all of us here that you would not claim any former lands or titles of your Targaryen ancestors. A thing we will hold you to. However, nobody ever said anything about claiming artifacts or heirlooms. Valyrian swords are a thing that come to mind. He grinned boyishly. He just stood there. His mouth was wide open, as he didn't know what to say. Kneel, brother, he heard Robb say. In a daze, he did as he was asked. All nobles in attendance came over and stood around him. Jaehaerys Targaryen, better known as Jon Snow and my brother, I bestow upon you the sword of your ancestors. It will belong to you and your descendants until the end of times as a reward of your loyalty, your service and your achievements during this war. I only have a single condition for you to accept this. He waited until they both locked eyes to continue. Seeing the powerful history and symbolism the sword has carried over the last 300 years, I find it adamant the sword is to be renamed. Whatever you name it is yours to decide, but it will need to find a new name before you find your way back to the north. Maybe a new scabbard and hilt would also help, although I trust your decision on that. He quickly agreed to the terms and Robb handed him the sword while he was still on his knees. He admired the blade, as he took around a foot of its length out of its scabbard. Distantly, he could hear Robb thank Lord Flint for he had received the sword from him in the first place. He also heard something about the Northern Lord being promised a reward for it, but he was barely paying attention. He looked over the dark Valyrian steel and the richly decorated scabbard. However, the most striking was the massive ruby infused in the hilt. The jewel alone would be worth a fortune. The sword in itself was priceless. It truly was one of a kind. As a young boy, he had always dreamed of wielding ice one day. Now, he had been given a sword that surpassed it in both legend and history. He looked up towards Robb, seeing ice nonchalantly leaning behind him against the wall. This is how it should be. Ice belonged to the head of House Stark. He would always admire the weapon and it would hold sentimental value to him for the rest of his life. Every time he looked at it, he could see their father grimly picking it up as he prepared himself to do his duty. Yet, it belonged to Robb. He looked down at the weapon again. This had belonged to his ancestors. It was something he could bestow upon his descendants. Robb had promised him much and more as rewards for his service, and he had gotten some monetary loot here and there to provide for himself, but this was the first thing he realized he could pass down to his future children. He had the other Targaryen artifacts, but they brought either just knowledge or sentimental value. Maybe some coin if they were sold, but that was it. This sword would forever give his descendants a reputation and a place at the high table, wherever they might find themselves. He looked up through the silent tears streaking across his face. "Thank you," he whispered. His brother just picked him up and hugged him, before laughing as he pulled away. "Oh, there is one more small condition. It is yours," he replied immediately. This made his brother grin. "You are carrying it with you to the negotiations with this Dragon Queen." He smiled, as he wiped away his tears with his tunic. Typical Robb to combine a heartfelt gift and political maneuvering at the same time. I can't wait to see the look your bloody dragon aunt is going to give you when you walk in with that blade, Snow." The Great Yon boomed. Most lords looked awkwardly at him, as they were reminded their next enemy was his aunt. He decided to set the record clear here once again. "An aunt I never met nor cared about, Umber. I can't change my blood, but if she is willing to bear arms against Robb then she is no kin of mine." This was met with approving grunts and nods from the whole room and everybody seemed to calm down. The Great Yon simply walked over and slapped him on his back. "Spoken like a true northerner. Let's hope the Dragon Queen has another few Targaryen trinkets on her, as we wouldn't want you to break your new habit of turning up for every battle with something new to shock half of Westeros." He grinned, as many of the surrounding lords cracked a smile. He simply rolled his eyes at the joke, as he returned the Umber's embrace. They spent the next hour triple-checking everything, from arrow stock to supply lines over tactical plans. They were all used to Robb's micromanaging by now after 2 years of campaigning. If he was honest, he needed to admit that it had only gotten worse and this campaign took the cake. Robb was nervous, but all trusted him and went along with it. They all knew they would get operational freedom once the battle commenced if they listened well now. While the Northerners and Riverlords simply accepted the behavior, recognizing it as one of the reasons for their many victories, some of the nobles of their newly annexed territories still gave off some funny looks. Whatever they might be thinking, they fell in line after having seen the effectiveness of his planning from the God's Eye to Storm's End. Robb's myth in the Crown Lands had gotten so big, none dared to question him even if they felt it was ridiculous. The same couldn't be said about their allies however, hence why they weren't here at this time. While Lord Davos had accepted and even indulged in Robb's ways, the same couldn't be said from some of the other Storm Lords. Lord Morrigan was a good commander and was always respectful, although he had made it clear he had considered the plans finished days ago. Others had outright laughed at them for it. This had caused some friction between the factions, but Robb had waved it away. "Let them laugh, the only reason we are here in the first place is because they couldn't manage protecting their homeland on their own. We have garnered loot and fame those men can't even dream of. Let them talk, while we win yet another battle for them." The men had grumbled about that, but once Robb reminded them that this one final battle standing between them was the only thing holding them back from leaving the Stormlands forever, they had shut up. The promise of future ransoms for their Dornish and Westerlander prisoners, in combination with more easy mines to plunder in the west after this placated the last holdouts. The Valyman had been split on the issue. While Sir Andor greatly looked up to Robb and followed him closely, clearly trying to learn as much as possible, Lord Harold seemed more critical. However, the Royce's influence over his lord and brother-in-law was great, as such friction with the Vale never rose to concerning levels. His brother had already asked them for written reports on everything this morning, so they wouldn't have to join the meeting and he still had as much information as possible. What these Southerners didn't understand however, was that the time spent together served more than just direct military purposes. It was the moment where Robb convinced all of them in their possibility to succeed and come out as victors. The moment where he lifted morale and got them all in line. The moment where he forced lords from Bear Island to the Blackwater and their troops into a one cohesive force with the same singular objective, achieving a complete and decisive victory against their enemies. While the meeting was running at its end, a messenger in Tully livery interrupted them. The man was let in immediately. "Your Grace, my lords, a messenger has been intercepted by the scouts." He acknowledged the room. He wore the Targaryen colors. "He says their Queen Daenerys is here to talk to you." The room went silent. "She is here?" his brother calmly asked. The guard nodded. A dragon could be seen circling overhead a clearing not far from there. The messenger said to expect her there. He bid me to urge you to hurry." The Tully soldier fearfully added. This greatly angered the room. Mumblings ranging from "who does she think she is" to arrogant incestuous bitch were loudly heard. Robb simply raised his hand to calm the room down. He looked to the guard. "Get Sir Brynden here as soon as possible, tell him he is in command of the army until I return." The man bowed low and quickly ran off. He turned to his vassals. "Sir Wylis and Lords Carstark, Bolton, Bracken, Roger, Pipe and Mallory, I want you all to go to the troops immediately. Put them on half alert. You are responsible for raising the forces of your respective regions and taking command should anything happen. If I am not back by nightfall, you expect the worst and prepare for attack. Orders are simple, you follow the plan and kill them all." He looked them in the eye, all simply nodded. They knew arguing for him not to go would be futile. "John, Sir Rupert Brune, Lady Mormont and Lords Umber and Mallister, you join me. I will send for Lord Harold, Sir Ander and Lord Morrigan to join us as well. Let's go, my lords, we have a queen to throw from our continent." He grinned, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. The change between now and an hour ago was palpable. He knew his brother, while an hour ago there were things he might be able to improve upon, now he just had to follow through. As such, his mood changed into an iron determination. As he walked over the room, he shouted for guards to get the commanders of the other kingdoms. All fell in line easily and they were on their way before they knew it. Robb had prepared for this for some time now, all was ready for them to drop everything and leave. They were soon joined by Lord Harold, Sir Ander and Lord Templeton for the Vale, while Lord Morrigan was accompanied by Lord Andrew Estermont for the Stormlands. That brought their company up to 11 members. Lord Morrigan had left Lord Swan in charge of the Stormlanders, while Lord Redfort and Sir Morton Waynwood would control the Vale army in Lord Arryn's absence. Behind them rode 100 heavy cavalry, waving banners in the air from all around Westeros. Banners from the north, Riverlands, Crownlands, Vale and Stormlands. Notably, one stuck out. The banner of House Dane waved among them to make sure the message struck home. He grinned. Robb had long decided to accept the Danes into the coalition before he brought it up this morning. The banner must have been made at night by some of their men. They rode into the small forest towards the clearing. Ghost and Grey Wind sniffing out any possible dangers in front of them, but they didn't seem concerned about anything on the ground. The skies were a different manner altogether, as he felt Ghost's pull in the back of his head very clearly. Its message was clear. Danger. They rode up towards the clearing, which was larger than he had expected. Their men lined up behind them as Robb signaled for them to halt. Apparently, he had entrusted them to the command of Sir Lucas Blackwood. Their friend looked stoically in front of him, preparing for any dangers that may come their way. In front of them was placed a pavilion. At the tent's entrance stood a few people. He wanted to slowly ride towards them, but Robb stopped him. "Not yet. Not before she comes down. I will not go to her like I am summoned like some subordinate, only to wait for her when sees it fit to arrive." They stood like that for a while, as he locked eyes with an older man in the armor of the Kingsguard. Could it be? He thought, as he could swear he recognized him as the mighty Sir Barristan Selmy from the stories. Barristan the Bold, most called him. After a period of tension that seemed to last forever, a shriek was heard overhead. As they looked up, they saw how a dragon circled over the clearing before descending next to the pavilion. Ghost silently bared its fangs at it, while Grey Wind loudly growled. It was the only sound made, except for the clapping of its wings and the restless fear that came from the horses. The beast itself was majestic. Its scales were black, and its horns and spinal plates were blood red. This much could be seen from this far away. Although terrified, he felt weirdly drawn to the beast. As he looked at it, it seemed to suddenly look straight at him. It had smoldering red pits for eyes and they seemed to lock into his own, as he admired the terrifying creature. Suddenly, a beautiful young woman descended from the back of the dragon, which shrieked loudly at Grey Wind. He could see its teeth were black as well, as it opened its maw. The direwolf simply barked back. Both beasts seemingly stuck in the same mental sparring match their masters were playing. He looked towards the area in the center of the clearing. Some 20 or so unsullied could be seen surrounding the tent, but no other troops seemed present. It could be a trap. There could be soldiers hidden inside. Sir Rupert Brune whispered to him, just loud enough to hear. "I doubt it, but we will know soon enough," he replied, without looking at him. He looked in front of him. "Ghost," he called. The direwolf simply turned around. "Go check if there is any danger." Without response, the direwolf simply started slowly stalking towards the tent. When he came closer, some unsullied lowered its spears at it, but Ghost simply ignored them as he walked past the Dragon Queen into the tent. Mere seconds later he walked out, sitting down on his hind legs some 20 feet from their opponents. The message was clear: no ambush. Rob looked at him and rolled his eyes at the display of both power and protectiveness. Their king called them forward and the 11 of them dismounted, together with some 20 guards that Sir Lucas ordered to follow them. They slowly walked across. He simply snapped his fingers once and Ghost walked over to him and took up position next to him. Mage Mormont almost growled when she saw one of her advisors. He threw her a look to ask what was going on. "My traitorous nephew," she simply growled. At last, they came eye to eye. "Queen Daenerys," Rob acknowledged the young woman in front of her. She was indeed beautiful. Her violet eyes were striking and gave of the feeling that she was directly looking into the core of your soul. Her long silver blonde hair was majestic and never had he seen such an even pale skin. The only thing that came remotely too close to it was his own. "So, this is my aunt." "Lord Rob," the woman answered. With those words she immediately managed to anger the whole company in front of her. A thing she had clearly miscalculated, as her eyes went wide at Lord Umber's subsequent outburst. "Truly, we're going to have this horse shit again. For fuck's sake, these Valyrians are daft," he exclaimed in frustration and anger. "It's King Rob for you, Dragon Lady. For you and anyone else that asks." Her advisors reacted shocked. A young girl with dusty skin and eyes of molten gold replied in agitation. "This is Queen Daenerys Targaryen. She is your lawful monarch. You should all kneel for her, as she is Daenerys Stormborn, the Unburnt, Queen of Meereen, Queen of the Andals and the Rhoynar and the First Men, Khaleesi of the Great Grass Sea, Breaker of Shackles, and Mother of Dragons," she proudly exclaimed. Sir Rupert Brune and Lords Umber, Mallister and Templeton simply scoffed, while Lady Mormont let out an exasperating sigh. The Great Yon replied once again. "Who cares? You want flowery titles. You'll get flowery titles. Let me present my liege," he replied in a mock bow towards Rob. "It's my honor to present you Robb Stark, King of the North, the Riverlands and Cracklaw Point, the young wolf, defender of Riverrun, Lannister's bane, destroyer of King's Landing, the Golden Company's ruin and protector of the old gods and the First Men." He stood up again and looked the little girl, over whom he towered, directly in the eye. "Now tell your queen to kindly fuck off back to Essos and leave us all alone in peace." Although crude as ever, Umber summarized the mood among their company perfectly. This invasion was one too many. They were done with tyrants and invaders who demanded their loyalty without having ever done anything for them or their homeland. Tywin Lannister, Cersei Lannister, Joffrey Waters, Petter Baelish, Aegon Blackfyr, Mace Tyrell, the list of people that had looked down upon them could go on and on. If this meeting continued like this, she would suffer the same fate they had. The sentiment was so great they even forgot about the dragon a few hundred yards away. The Targaryen queen looked flabbergasted. She recovered quickly though. "I am the heir to my father. The 7 kingdoms are mine by right, Lord Umber." Another row of scoffs followed. "I was there at the Trident when we shattered your laws and your right. They are of no consequence anymore. Besides, the 7 kingdoms have ceased to exist altogether. There is nothing for you to claim here anymore. Her mood suddenly changed. You were there when my brother was killed. The Umber Lord simply grunted. So was I, Lord Malister replied. She looked in anger towards the River Lord. What did you expect, after your father unlawfully executed my brother? He spit out in response. Besides, I remember you were there too, Sir Barristan. I was, at the other side. The White Knight stoically responded. The same side I was. Sir Rupert Brune added, equally as stoic. This seemed to confuse most of their opponents. You fought for my brother? She asked the Knight of Cracklaw Point. I did. The reply came. Now you fight for the Starks. The Brune heir looked her straight in the eyes. I do. Both sides looked at each other. Finally, his brother spoke up. I propose we continue the rest of our talk inside. Daenerys Targaryen looked at him, before nodding. He wanted to walk inside, but an Unsullied stopped him. He looked him in the eye. No, Wolf, the man commanded. He simply raised an eyebrow in response. Choosing to ignore the man, he walked on. He was stopped by the man's spear. No, Wolf, the man commanded, louder this time. His hand went to his sword, as Ghost arched his back. Grey Wind let out a bark and Robb turned around at the commotion. He squinted his eyes. The Targaryen girl saw what was happening. I suppose you could leave your companions outside, Robb Stark. I won't bring my dragon inside either, unless you insist upon it. Robb looked long in the eyes of the Dragon Queen. His blue eyes were cold and hard as a winter's morning. They exchanged looks together and had a conversation without saying anything. In the end both he and Robb nodded to each other. Ghost, stay and protect. He simply said. Grey, stay with Ghost. He heard from Robb. The small growl made it clear what Grey Wind thought about it. Ghost, although quiet, seemed to scowl at him as well. He ignored the wolf and walked inside, the Unsullied soldier following him inside. Seats were pulled out and they all sat down. He sat at Robb's right side, as he always did now. In front of him sat the little girl that had been so brave as to admonish the great Jon before. Let me introduce my advisors. The Dragon Queen began, trying to get a hold of the situation. Behind her stood a huge eunuch, in the colors of the Kingsguard. To my right is Sir Barristan Selmy, a man many of you seem to know. He is the Lord Commander of my Queen's Guard. Next to him in order are Aggo, my blood rider, Dario Naharis, captain of the Storm Crows, Humphrey Stone, a sergeant of the Golden Company, and Marcelin, commander of the Mother's Men. To my left is Missandei, my trusted advisor. Next to her is Grey Worm, commander of my Unsullied. He looked into the eyes of the soldier who had barred him entrance. He seemed everything he had expected these Unsullied to be. They would be hard to beat, but he welcomed the challenge. Simon Stripeback, commander of the Free Brothers, she continued while pointing to another freedman. That is Simon Sunglass, Lord of Sweetport Sound. Finally, we have Sir Jorah Mormont, one of your fellow countrymen. That is no countryman of mine. Lord Umber simply retorted. Lady Mage's reply was even harsher. She had sat herself in front of him. Hello nephew, have you finally come to accept the punishment for your actions? Ice has been waiting to cleave your head from your shoulders for years now, after the disgrace you put our house through. Although, if you ask nicely, I'll have Daisy lend Longclaw to the king. It would be poetic if you met your end at the point of your former sword. Aunt Mage, the simple reply came. It was clear the man was holding in his anger, but he let nothing slip. Robb grinned a cold smile at them. As you can see, that is Lady Mage Mormont, ruler of Bear Island. He said as he waved his hand to her side of the table. He emphasized her rule over the Mormont's ancestral lands to pour salt in the traitor's open wound. The man's fist could be seen clenching and unclenching several times, although he still kept quiet. Next to her in order sits Sir Rupert Brune, heir to Deep Den, Lord Jason Malister, Lord of Seaguard, Great Jon Umber, Lord of Last Hearth, and finally Jon, my brother in all but name. My cousin by blood actually, as he was born as Jaehaerys Targaryen. He is the son of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and my aunt Lyanna Stark. He felt all eyes burn on him. He responded only to two pairs of them, those of his aunt, her Lord Commander. Both looked at him intensely. "So, the rumors are true?" she simply said. He matched her daunting violet gaze. They are," he responded as he put his hands clearly on the table, showing of his Targaryen seal ring. The Lord Commander looked at him intensely. "The sword you carry, is it what I think it is?" "It is." "Blackfyr, the sword of Aegon the Conqueror." Daenerys' eyes went wide. "How did you get that?" "It has been lost for over a century." He inhaled, but Robb cut him off. "Let us end the introductions, before speaking of such things." Sir Barristan nodded, while the Dragon Queen's eyes remained fixed on him. "To my left is Harold Arryn, Lord of the Eyrie. Next to him are Sir Andor Royce, the heir to Runestone, Simond Templeton, Lord of Ninesters, Andrew Estermont, Lord of Sweetport Sound and Hand of the Queen to Queen Shireen Baratheon, and Lester Morrigan, Lord of Crow's Nest." Sir Barristan looked at them all critically, raising eyebrows when for him new information was told. Nonetheless, he greeted the latter four men with courtesy. He probably knew them from his time at court. Simond Sunglass stared daggers at Estermont, who had received his forfeited lands. "Now, what is it you want to talk about?" Robb asked, as he put his hands in front of him on the table. The young queen took in a deep breath, before letting it out in the middle and smiling. "I almost forget my manners. Please my lords, eat," she said as she waved over some Issozi servants. On their plates was bread and salt. It was a cheap trick to try to convince them that she was from here and respected their customs probably. Yet, he appreciated her gesture nonetheless. He put a hand on Robb's wrist so he wouldn't eat before any of their opponents did. Only after Sir Barristan took a piece, did all of them eat without any concern. You could never be too careful, but the knight's honor wasn't up for questioning. "So, tell me your story and that of the sword you carry," Daenerys finally demanded, as she looked him in the eye. "There isn't much to tell," he responded. "I was raised Ned Stark's bastard. He lied to protect my life from Robert Baratheon." At this, she seemed to nod. This surprised him. "There were multiple attempts on my life during my childhood. I'm not surprised he would dare to kill his friend's nephew, if it meant ending my brother's line." He took that in but chose not to respond. "Whatever the case, I didn't know. Not until a year ago, when Lord Reed told me the truth. He was the last survivor of the Tower of Joy. The last one who knew the truth." Now, Sir Barristan arched forward. He looked into the knight's eyes and remembered with how much respect his father had spoken about him. He decided he should know the truth. "Your brothers died protecting me. They blocked my father and his companions from entering. They didn't know before it was too late. This was after the Trident and the fall of King's Landing. They thought you the new king." Sir Barristan guessed. They died protecting my life from the only man who could protect me, who did protect me for years. My uncle Eddard Stark, who raised me as his own. The only real father I ever had." "How could you be king? My brother was already married." "At most, you'd be his bastard," the Targaryen queen brought up. "My parents were wed before a weirwood tree and later for a septon at the God's Eye. Sir Arthur Dayne was one of the witnesses on the contract. It wasn't the first time a Targaryen took two wives. Rhaegar decided the dragon needed 3 heads and Elia Martell couldn't give him any more children. He simply replied. "What did you say?" she asked in shock. "The dragon must always have 3 heads." He shrugged. It was a thing he said a lot. Some kind of prophecy, it seems. He saw the girl swallow, but she didn't push it. To his surprise, she seemed to accept everything he told them. "After Lord Reed told me, I told my brother. Sometime later I swore my loyalty to him. I do not want the 7 kingdoms. I never wanted it. I forswore every claim on it for me and our entire family. The time of dragons ended when my grandfather Aerys Targaryen, your father, brutally murdered my other grandfather Rickard Stark. I helped my brother take King's Landing and destroy the Red Keep. Our ancestors have done enough, no one wants our house back on any throne." She looked at him with a mixed range of emotions. They ranged from disgust and confusion to anger and shock. It wasn't your decision to make. You didn't have the right. It was my brother's. It is mine. Your father's former Kingsguard seemed to disagree. None of them went to Dragonstone to protect you or your brother. They died for my claim, not yours. Besides, it doesn't matter. It is done. There is no Iron Throne anymore. The Red Keep is gone, blown up together with most of Egon's Hill. King's Landing has half burned to the ground. There is nothing to reign over anymore. So, we heard. It doesn't matter. When the Conqueror set foot on Westeros, King's Landing was nothing but an army camp. We will rebuild it. I will reforge the throne with dragon fire from the swords of those who dare stand in my way. She threatened. He simply shrugged. It won't be my sword. Valyrian steel doesn't burn. She narrowed her eyes. How did you get the sword? My brother gave it to me. It was taken from the pretender who invaded these shores just before you. The pretender? He was not your brother Egon? Sir Barristan asked. No, Varys and the Lord Commander of the Golden Company confessed everything after a few weeks of torture. He was a female line Blackfyre descendant. That's how he had the sword. Igor Bittersteel gave it to the Golden Company to hold on to it in name of Daemon's descendants. Now it is once more where it belongs, with the true branch of House Targaryen. They took a moment to take everything in. They probably heard rumors, but this was the first confirmation they could get. What about this pretender? Where is he? Dead. Robb simply replied. Both nodded. Robb decided it was time to take these negotiations in his hands. Why did you invite me here? I wanted to get to know you and give you a chance to bend the knee on a few conditions, she answered. First of all, I would need an oath. Robb interrupted her by raising her hand. I don't want to be disrespectful, Queen Daenerys, but I do not need to hear your so-called conditions. I won't be bending anything, nor will anyone else. In front of you sits a coalition compromising most of Westeros. The whole of the North, Riverlands, Vale, Crownlands and Stormlands has amassed against you. We even have a contingent of House Dane from Dorne amongst us. The only reason no Reachmen or Westerlanders are here is because they are stuck in internal strife. No one wants you here. She wanted to interrupt, but he just raised his hand. If you wish to point out your Westerosi followers, spare me. A northern traitor who ran to save his head, the brother of a former minor lord begging for revenge, and a bunch of Ironborn whose only redeeming quality is that they rather fight for you than be burned alive. He summed up what they all thought about them. The only notable Westerosi follower you have is the man sitting next to you. Yet, for all his fame and reputation, he is but one man. He ended his speech. He arched forward towards the Dragon Queen. If you hand over the last remaining members of the Golden Company and go back to Essos, we will forgive you the destruction your men caused these last 2 weeks. Go, leave and never come back. You can't be serious. She laughed. No army has ever been able to withstand dragons. Your ancestor Torrhen bent the knee when he saw my ancestors' dragons. You would be wise to do the same now. And you would be wise to not mistake that beast outside for Balerion the Black Dread. I must admit your companion is like nothing I have ever seen before. More magnificent than anything, man or beast, has a right to be. Yet, he is no Balerion. The maestas write of him having had a wingspan 450 feet in length. How big is the wingspan of the one outside? No more than 40 feet in length, I would say. Merax's wingspan was over 300 feet when it died in Dawn. I will say it once more. Leave this continent, nothing but death awaits you here. It doesn't matter how big they are, when you are consumed by their dragon fire. She bit back viciously. I will take my chances. Robb answered coldly. He looked over towards their exchange. They were exactly each other's opposites. Where Daenerys was hot, full of fire, rage and emotion, Robb was cold, he was hard, emotionless and unrelenting like an icy morning on a winter's day. They stared at each other. Robb tried once more. I do not wish to fight or kill you. I do not want to take the last of Jon's paternal family away from him, but I will if you force my hand. I have been fighting for 2 years now. I have a daughter, which I have never seen before due to the wars. I have campaigned thousands of miles, beaten over 100,000 foes, defeated more armies than I can recall. I will not give it all up and betray my people's trust after that. They chose for me to wear this," he explained, as he pointed to his winter crown. "I never wanted it, but I will carry the burden until I draw my last breath. Be wise and leave this continent forever. Carve out a country in Essos for your people and give them a better life than what is awaiting them here on our shores. You will only bring them misery and pain here. Your noble efforts to free them from the cruelty of slavery will be for naught, as you will have just hastened their demise on foreign soil. Westeros is mine by right. Either you will submit willingly, or I will make you with fire and blood." Daenerys ominously spoke out her house's words, the anger visible on her face. Robb simply glanced at her. "Dragons are creatures of fire and heat and summer, but winter has come now. Your time is over. Leave, while you still can. I could simply order Drogon to burn you all before you ever got back to your camp." She threatened, testing him and his resolve. You could, and there would be nothing I could do about it. "However, you forget one thing," he replied, his tone as even as ever. "What may that be?" she asked. "I have 2 direwolves standing vigil outside, only a few feet from this very table. While I could do nothing to save me or anyone at this side of the table, I can guarantee you none on your side will see morning after I let them loose. My army has orders to fight even if I do not return, I care not. I have 2 younger brothers to pass the crown to and enough loyal lords to see this war to an end in their name. You would be burning your last remaining kin. If you die, your cause falls apart and no one can take up your mantle. If that is what you desire, do it now. It would save my men from the senseless slaughter that will be committed in the name of your ambition tomorrow." The Dragon Queen simply locked eyes with him, trying to guess if he was bluffing. Robb simply raised his eyebrows, which was followed by a howl by Grey Wind outside. This seemed to startle everyone in the tent, not in the least their own lords. The howl was answered by a dragon's shriek outside, yet the staring match in the tent remained. When no one said anything more, his brother stood up. "This meeting is at an end. Sir Barristan, it was an honor to finally meet you. My father spoke highly of you and my little brother idolizes you as he does no other. It will pain me to see you on the field tomorrow. Your father was a good man, Robb Stark. I am sorry that I could not save him. He did not deserve his end. Yet, my place is with my queen. That's where you will find me," he responded. "I expected nothing less." His brother simply nodded, extending his arm out of respect. The knight took it in silence and Robb walked away towards the exit of the tent. He glanced over towards his aunt, trying to remember her in his mind's eye, before following after his brother. Chapter 60, Dragonfire. 301 AC. Robb. He looked over the terrain in front of him. Last night's light snow had mostly melted, but the whole area was still filled with slush. Some parts of the ground were still half frozen from the winter cold and none enjoyed standing here like this in a half-frozen, wet wasteland in the middle of the Stormlands. Yet, it was exactly the weather he had hoped for. The colder and wetter the ground, the less chance of a repeat of the Field of Fire. The cold winter air caressed his cheeks as he looked over the fields. The battle lines were drawn up and battle could commence at any minute. It was the silence before the storm. The 1 minute where all an experienced warrior could hear was his own heartbeat. A moment when time seemed to slow and everything else was blocked out. A time of peace before all the carnage and misery that would soon be unleashed. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes and thought about how his daughter looked like in his mind's eye. When he opened them again, he exhaled the air out of his body. He was ready. This was what he was supposed to do. If he won here, the Targaryen threat of Westeros unity would finally be over. He sat safely on a hill with the reserve cavalry, as always. He had adopted the technique a while back from Tywin Lannister and he needed to admit it had his advantages. In battles like the Whispering Wood or Oxcross it was necessary and helpful to lead from the front. Yet, in open-pitched battles the tactical benefits of overlooking the battle were enormous. It had saved him the day at Atlanta and assured his victories ever since. His army had also been organized in his favorite style. 3 great blocks of infantry with cavalry on the sides and reserves behind. The only difference were his archers. Normally, he would have them in the front or on the hills and they would fall back behind his lines after the enemy advanced most of the way. This gave them a clear line of fire and baited the enemy into attacking into his position. Today, everything was different. They were fighting dragons. As such, he had scattered large groups of archers all throughout their position, even within his own reserve unit. They had had clear instructions to always prioritize the dragons, whatever the situation or orders may be. If possible, they should aim for the rider. If not, they aimed for the eyes, mouth, wings or soft underbelly. Of these dragons there was no sign. So, he just looked over the troops. His units stood fully disciplined in their positions. The left cavalry was commanded by his brother, with Domeric as his skillful second. The left infantry block consisted of his veteran northern soldiers. The Great Jon once again having the honor of command. He had chosen the same men to help him as at the God's Eye. His brother Roderick and Lord Flint would do well in the position, even if it had led to some jealousy among their peers. Both men had proven themselves and he would not change things simply to satisfy the pride of some of his nobles. In the center stood the Valiman, proud and unyielding. They were nominally commanded by Lord Arryn, but real command lay as much with him as it did with Lord Templeton, Lord Redfort and Sir Morton Wainwood. On the right were positioned the Stormlanders and Rivermen under the command of Sir Bryndon. He usually took command of some form of cavalry, but he needed someone to keep the Riverlanders together and he would follow orders just fine. No one would question his authority either. He was aided by Lords Morrigan and Bracken. The right cavalry was commanded by Sir Andrew Royce. It consisted of most of the Vale and Stormlander cavalry. Behind their lines in different groups stood his artillery. Overall command of them was given to Sir Willis Marndale, yet local commanders would have a certain amount of autonomy when the battle started. Finally, his reserve infantry was once again commanded by Lady Mormont. She had never failed him and wouldn't start now, that much he knew. For the first time since long, opposition had been voiced against her command. It had come on the premise of her sex, of course, even if her status as head of only one of the smaller houses also played against her. As his army's composition turned more and more southern, so did the discussions in his command tent. However, her achievements had waved all opposition off the table in the end. Lady Mage had helped save his line at Atlanta, had impeccable hammered the Lannisters at the God's Eye and had quite literally driven the nail in the Golden Company's coffins with her mace against the Pretender. He would be damned before giving command to some self-absorbed Stormlander over her. He looked at the enemy composition and saw nothing he hadn't expected. The Unsullied stood in the center, a giant block of discipline in a sea of chaos. On both sides stood her freedmen. In some parts, their battle line looked more like a half-organized mob than an army ready to advance. He saw how some mercenaries, Golden Company or otherwise, were intermingled on the flanks. Probably to try and construct at least some form of order on which the freedmen could base themselves. On their right, a small cavalry force could be seen. Their right was open, as she probably didn't have enough horses to put them on both flanks. As the Esoi didn't use banners, he had to guess who commanded where. Although, if he had to make an assumption, he would say her Unsullied general commanded the center, while sellsword captains commanded her flanks and the cavalry. The reserve he would have put in the hands of Sir Barristan. As he could see a full white banner flanking the Targaryen one in the back, he assumed he was right there at least. As he looked over the plains, enemy trumpets started shouting. So, it begins. The enemy started walking forward in the exact manner one would assume it to do. The center marched with terrifying discipline. The sound of their boots audible across the fields as they all marched in the exact same rhythm. This was in great contrast with the freedmen, who walked towards them as if they were two hordes of wildlings. As they neared his lines, the freedmen held back. They wanted the Unsullied to engage the center first. Sir Willis made sure they were peppered by groups of archers from all sides on their way, but every time a man went down another simply took his place. Their discipline was frightening, as they looked like they had no feeling of self-preservation whatsoever. He thanked the gods for their light armor because otherwise they would have been near impossible to kill. Now, a well-aimed arrow, sword or dagger would do the trick. Right before they reached the line, Esso's former slave soldiers threw hundreds of throwing spears at his line with practiced ease. The Valiman had been warned about this and most got their shields up in time. Even so, the damage still looked severe with multiple small holes forming in the first few lines. The Valiman wasted no time and new men quickly ran forward and plugged the holes. A second volley was thrown, after which the SOZ soldiers marched forward. After the center had been engaged, the freedman charged wildly into his flanks. Here the toll of his archers could clearly be seen. Yet, nothing stopped their frenzied charge. His troops took it right on the chin, after spear walls had been expertly formed on both sides. As the charge subsided, both broke ranks and a real melee commenced on both flanks. He could see the sellsword pushing themselves towards the front line, clearly intent on stabilizing it. All was going well for his army and he knew both cavalry forces would soon start to flank their forces. He didn't have to wait long before the familiar horns were sounding across the valley. John's force immediately charged towards the enemy cavalry, while Sir Andrew was moving around the enemy force from the right side. Suddenly, a roar could be heard from above and it was soon followed by two others. 3 dragons arose from the tree lines behind the battlefield. To his shock, they flew in some kind of V formation. The largest dragon was in the front and a small figure could be seen on its back. The dragons wasted no time and quickly dove towards Sir Andrew's force. He knew what was going to happen before it did. It was brutal. Every beam of fire killed dozens of horses and their riders. Yet, that wasn't even the deadliest part. Due to the fire, hundreds of horses started throwing of their riders, running away to all corners of the battlefield. Hundreds of men were trampled by their horses before his eyes and no one could do anything about it. The rest of the cavalry force was in complete disarray and with one look he could see it would take a while before anyone could order them back into a line or charge anywhere. The dragons didn't seem to care at all. The big dragon, Drogon she had called him, flew down once he stopped breathing fire. He snatched multiple riders up with his teeth or claws like they were nothing, before taking to the skies again. The screaming bodies of the unfortunate men could be heard and seen as they were dropped from 80 feet high back down amongst their comrades. The dragons never looked back and flew further along towards his back line. It was only now that he realized that all his men had also been staring at the horrifying scene unfolding in front of them. Be ready, men. Archers prepare to shoot, and soldiers be ready to dose any fires with the buckets and reservoirs of water all around you. Hold steady. He shouted at the top of his lungs. As one, his forces snapped out of it and started doing as they were told. As the dragons flew towards them, all 11 tray buckets fired their stone ammunition towards them with terrifying might. He only now realized his folly ever even using them. Their projectiles were not accurate enough and the dragons saw them coming from a long way out. They avoided them like it was nothing more than a game to them. The only benefit was that around half of them landed in her army's backlines. He had read that the smaller Targaryen dragons had been nimbler than the warbeasts Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters had ridden, but he had never expected this. They flew over the edge of his right infantry line and the biggest one let loose another breath of fire. This time, he was answered by over 100 arrows and the attack quickly stopped as the dragon climbed higher to escape the projectiles. It had shrieked like it was in pain, even though it didn't seem seriously wounded. However, it had done enough damage to save his right flank. As he looked upon his troops, he could see only 2 or 3 dozen had been burned by the fire and they were quickly doused with the help of the water spread between their lines. It felt like a small victory, as his right could have been in as much disarray as their counterparts on horseback by now. There was no time to celebrate though, as the Black Dragon had regained control and all 3 dragons were once again flying towards him. At that moment, the first of the ballista let loose of their projectiles. Around 20-foot-long arrow shafts flew through the air. The dragons swerved out of the way, multiple of them barely missing their targets. Only one of them fit its target. One shaft grazed the back of the cream dragon, but he seemed unfazed by it. The dragons did change course. Daenerys obviously recognized the danger and turned towards the ballista that had just fired. She fell upon them like an expert huntress would on her prey. None of the ballista had time to reload and soon all of them were engulfed in flames. The flames had a mixture of colors. He could see black, yellow, red, orange and pale gold all mixed together. The crew tried to run for their lives, while they were burned alone. Their only protection came from a group of archers nearby. They shot a volley at the dragons, managing to hurt the green one sufficiently enough for it to climb back towards the skies. The other two kept on with their carnage. The black one turning its ire towards the archers, many perishing in a matter of seconds. Yet, the dragons had stayed somewhat stagnant in the air whilst breathing their killing breaths. His other ballista crews and archers had used this moment to aim and fire dozens of arrows their way. A ballista shaft went through the wing of the great black dragon. The beast shrieked in pain and anger, turning around to look for the cause of his pain. Drogon climbed higher and higher out of accurate reach of his archers, until he dove down towards a group of 5 tread buckets and 12 scorpions. The monstrous flying lizard breathed dragon fire, engulfing half of the weapons in dark, black flames. All the while, the cream dragon had fared less well. 2 ballista bolts had gone through its left wing, while multiple arrows had found their marks all over its body. The beast screamed in pain, as it tried to stabilize itself with its damaged wing. Luckily enough for it, the black one had proven enough of a distraction for it to get away. Now the green one dove down once more, finishing of most of the siege weapons its larger brother had left untouched. It went to the skies once more, preparing to fly towards another group to set them aflame. He couldn't focus on it though, as the black one flew towards him. In shock, he realized what was going to happen. He grabbed his shield up from the ground next to him and held it up in the air. Suddenly he was engulfed in a heat he had never felt before, but as soon as it had come it stopped. He found himself on the ground, as multiple people slapped something on him. Dazed and hurt he barely realized what was happening, until the unmistakable voice of Smalljan shouted and he was suddenly drenched to the bone in ice-cold water. He raised his head and saw his friend standing there with an empty bucket in his hand. Suddenly, Tok kneeled by his side. "Rob, are you all right?" he shouted with concern. He tried to stand up, in which he succeeded with difficulty. He looked upon the shield he had dropped in his fall, it was aflame and some of its metal band seemed to be melting. "What happened?" he managed to breath out. "The dragon tried to set you aflame." Just as it opened its mouth, a volley of arrows hit it. It scurried away for now. However, a small flame got you. We need to get you out of that armor, now. Before its cloth or metal burns too deep into your skin. Still in a daze, he did as he was told. His friends quickly unbuckled the straps in his armor and threw it away. Most of it seemed fine, although part of its right side and shoulder seemed to be slowly melting. In shock, he realized his friends were cutting away his soaked tabard. When he looked towards his right shoulder, he realized why. The fabric on his upper arm and shoulder was burned and seemed to be going inside his flesh. They had to cut it out now the wound was still fresh. Only when he saw it, he realized the excruciating pain coming from his shoulder, as the last of the days faded away. His friends expertly cut away all of the cloth. To and Daisy got the last remaining pieces out of it with their daggers and Owen quickly pushed a heap of slushy snow and ice against it. The cold tempered the pain and he was finally able to look around. It seemed like one of his guards hadn't been as lucky as to survive the flames. A smoldering corpse lay only a few feet away from him. He looked towards To and silently asked who it had been. His friend's face fell. "Sir Wendell," he whispered slowly. He swallowed heavily. Jon's mentor and a trusted friend gone in a single moment. Sudden grief threatened to engulf him. It would have, if not for Smalljan. The Umber Air lifted him up by grabbing him under his armpits and put him on his feet. "There is no time for any of that. Next time we'll all be dead if we don't do something about those dragons, now." He nodded meekly and looked around. The cream and black dragons were reorganizing themselves high in the sky, while the green was still terrorizing his artillery crews and archers. He saw multiple lines of scattered and blackened corpses spread across the fields from the flights it had taken. Yet, it was alone and isolated. "Archers, ballista, shoot everything you have at that green dragon. Do it now," he shouted at the top of his lungs. Smalljan's booming voice took over the command and the words carried across the hills. He saw groups of terrified archers knocking and releasing arrows, while ballista bolts fired in from all angles. The dragon dodged the ballista and angrily burned another dozen of his archers. He looked for another easy prey until the pressure of the arrows caused him to spread his wings as he desperately tried to gain height to get away from the dozens of arrows that kept coming at him from all sides. It screamed loudly, and from the corner of his eye, he saw the other two dragons quickly racing towards it. He suddenly realized the green dragon was screaming for help. It was losing. Then it happened. Confused and distracted by all the arrows, it didn't see a ballista bolt coming. It hit it right in its belly and wedged itself deep between its scales. Its screech of pure agony that it let out went straight to the bone. It began to lose height, still engulfed in a rain of arrows. Most ricocheted of its scales, but dozens stuck into its wings or lodged itself between two scales. Just as the black dragon with Daenerys on its back arrived, a second ballista bolt hit the green dragon in the chest. It knocked the dragon right out of the sky. It crash-landed in a wide arc some 100 feet further away. The black dragon